even with that investigation being a shit show and not showing us what people thought it was going to show us. Everybody thought it was going to show us Trump peeing on hookers, dapping up Putin, exchanging fucking favors. That's not what it was ever going to show us. What it was going to show us was Russian subversion has been here a very long time, and it's deeply entrenched into every political party.
Yeah. Man.
Just when I think you couldn't possibly be any dumber, you go and do something like this. And totally redeem yourself.
Yo, what's up, internet? Welcome back to another episode of Three Averagely Intelligent Dudes, and today we're discussing dangerous ideas. We got some great topics today. We're going to talk a little bit about how the USSR might be subverting the United States through, I don't know, secret coercional tactics, like it's going to be an interesting
propaganda.
Topic. Propaganda, but it might not even be propaganda necessarily.
No, it's propaganda.
You might be propaganding each other. Anyway, it's going to be an interesting conversation about that, about how our ideals might be being subverted by communist
foreign
ideals.
agents.
There it is. And we're also going to talk about
the lack of people willing to work in the abundance of jobs that are available for them to work in.
Yeah.
It's called the Great Resignation. And basically, people ain't taking this shit no more.
Yeah.
They want to wear pajamas and have coffee at 5:30 in the morning at their own house, not at the office.
Yeah.
They don't want your bullshit healthcare plan, and they don't want your bullshit wages. They want a bigger slice of the pie.
Yeah, and it looks like people might start organizing a little bit more. We saw the unions kind of go away in my lifetime, and we might see a return to organized labor and bargaining tactics.
Are you saying that the empire strikes back?
I'm saying that the revolution has leverage,
and it will not be televised.
It does have leverage. All right, it's gonna be a fun episode, man. Obviously, we're joking about it, but it's gonna be a good time and a great conversation, and we hope you enjoy it.
Yep.
And nobody likes to be stereotyped. We were talking about this the other day off the podcast. We were talking about having dreads now, and it's like just being stereotyped and treated completely differently because of it. And I always would get very upset when people would stereotype me as being like some sort of like weak, or oh, you're just like some liberal like cupcake muffin motherfucker. And it's always like you get that internal sense of like, I was a veteran. I ruck marched. I held a weapon that shot grenades out of the bottom of it. I'm a strong man. Like,
have you ever shot a grenade?
You don't look like you shoot grenade launchers, do you? But that would always hit like an internal chord within me because I'm being misrepresented. And that's where stereotyping, like you said, if you just don't let somebody out of their box. Like if you as a cop pull me over and you just will not let go of the stereotype that I'm some pot smoking hippie degenerate because of long hair and tattoos, you won't allow me to be what I am, which is a completely unique human experience. That's where
it gets to me. Like you said, like if you I expect to be judged on my appearance. That's why I manicure my appearance. Like I pick certain clothes to wear, and I do like be questioning whether or not the dreads will, because I understand that people are just by nature going to do that, and I don't really hold that against them. I don't have to have dreads, or whatever. But like you said, if I talk to you for a minute and you keep treating me a certain way because I have dreads, and I'm obviously showing you that that's not my case, I'll start getting lit.
Yeah, I don't really mind it too much.
Yeah. I did. It is tricky though. Like I said, I'm trying to get these jobs. I'm like looking at a job at the Win and all this stuff, and I have to hit my friend up and be like, "Yo, you think they're comfortable with dreaded people? Like, are they gonna like just shun me away immediately because they're like, oh, you got dreads? Like, fuck that, dude. It's like, who knows? But and that would suck if I felt like I was being, like you said, like stereotyped against the job just because of my appearance. But
I had people do that with my afro.
Yeah,
like people would be
for
like,
sure.
They'd want me to like cut it or do something. Like they wouldn't ever like say like, oh, can you cut it? But cutting it would be like the easiest solution. They'd be like, can you do you like do braids or something? This is like in the food industry, like working in a kitchen and shit. And I was like, nah.
Yeah.
No. I mean,
but
I'll
see,
pull it back.
Is that discrimination?
I'll put it on like a hairnet for you if you want. But
because I would readily admit that dreads are not the most professional looking hairstyle on the planet.
Yeah, and having lots of hair is not really ideal for working in a kitchen around other people's food.
Right.
So
Well,
like,
this is a good point,
I don't
though.
really blame them per se. I'm like, hey, look, and I guess for me, it's like growing up with the internet and seeing how the internet evolved and everything. I kind of lost that. Oh, like I'm not going to be able to fit in anywhere. Like, I know that there's jobs that people with afros can get. So it's like, I'm not too worried about it if I can't work at this specific job. Like, it's at the most, it's been a short cost of my time to come to this interview with you. But other than that, it's not too, and it happens all the time, really. And that's why, and like you said, because I know that they're like, I understand that I can't help it. And I make conscious effort to take steps to always question what my intuition thinks of that person. Like, just because that person is dressed a certain way, or looks a certain way, doesn't necessarily mean that my assumptions are correct, even though I have them.
Yeah.
Where I know that a lot of people don't do a lot of stuff consciously, even like the basic conscious stuff. So I don't expect them to be on some sort of conscious level where they're like able to look outside of a stereotype box. So even when they don't let me out of it, I'm like, okay, I'm done with this conversation. But it's almost like I look at them as like cute. I almost want to pat them on the head. I almost want to be like, don't worry about it, buddy. It's okay. You didn't hurt my feelings. And then I'll just leave.
I do too. I look at it the same way.
Like when a little kid comes up and like tries to kick you in the shin or whatever at the playground, and you're just like, oh, you have terrible parents. I'm sorry. You rowdy little bastard.
You made me think about when you were talking about kind of like the job industry and the hairstyles. You both of you touched on it. Like, so in the military, it kind of makes sense. You have to be uniform to follow orders mindlessly and slaughter people.
Right.
So it makes sense that you wouldn't let them express themselves.
You can't march correctly in lockstep if the guy in front of you is wearing a bun. I mean, it's just scientifically not possible.
Well, just in the sense of like,
they have to strip your humanity.
Yeah, exactly. They have to strip you down. It's literally shaving the monkey bald and then being like, now you're my monkey.
Yeah.
So you got to stay within a certain. You got to stay within a certain monkey code of actions and ethics. It's like kind of fucked in a sense, but
it's part of the game.
There's a good reason for it.
There's a good reason for it.
But now we have like, you touched on this where it's like a corporation will be like, can you fit in our stupid little hat? No, you can't fit our stupid little hat that we have made in China on your head. Well, you're gonna have to cut your hair. Oh, well, customers on the floor don't want to see a mohawk.
Yeah.
That's like, and it's like,
how do you know that?
I'm stocking milk. Like, why does it matter what my hair looks like? And like, I remember there was a guy in the early days of like when I remember I was working for a more conservative grocery company where you couldn't have like the long hair, you couldn't have dreads. There was like all these restrictions, right? Like your hair couldn't like touch your shoulders or your collar or something like that if you were a man. All this kind of bullshit, And I remember this guy was a vendor. So he worked for like Coca-Cola or Pepsi or Lay's chips or something like that. So he didn't have those requirements on him. And he came in with the weekend hair. The weekend hair where it's like a dread that just comes out like a crazy like unicorn thing. And then he had like one over here and then one back here. It looked like Pooh Shiesty or something or like some crazy rapper. And I was just like, damn, I'm missing out because I might not want that, but I like expressing myself through my physical appearance. And being held down by a fucking $10 an hour job and not being allowed to show my physical appearance is a lot different than being in the military. You know what I'm saying? Like the fact that corporations have kind of adopted this, you have to look on our uniform code of, appearance. It's like, I've always thought about it's not a new phenomenon. Back in the 50s, if you weren't wearing a suit, you weren't going to get hired. If your hair was this far touched your ears, you weren't going to be able to work in the industries. But I feel like it's 2021. We've come a long way. We live in a world of laser beams and virtual reality. I should be able to let my freak flag fly.
You could not have led me into to my topic any better than that, because that's the type of shit that people aren't accepting anymore. Like, the workforce is changing in a way that people are just like no longer like accepting these status quos that have been around since the 50s and 40s and 30s and stuff. So I've been hearing this thing going around called the Great Resignation, right? Which I want to start by saying, like, we predicted this on this podcast. Okay. We called it like months and months and months ago, because like they're acting surprised. Like a lot of the corporations and big, I guess the powers that be are like, what? Everybody's quitting their jobs? And it's like, we knew this was going to happen. I was like, there's no way that people are going to get a taste of working at home for a year, you know, going on Zoom, getting able to work from their house, doing the same shit. And then you were going to get them to somehow go back to the office. I was like, there's no way. There's no way. And so, I mean, we're seeing that happen now. I want to just play this little clip real quick to kind of get the viewers caught up on what I'm talking about here and everybody on the same page. And then we're going to dive into this.
The Great Resignation is here, and it's time to understand why. The U.S. Department of Labor reported a total of 11.5 million workers quit their jobs during the spring of 2021, and that number is expected to grow. Polling by Microsoft, Gallup, and Persio show nearly half of employees are actively reevaluating their current position or searching for new opportunities, and that 38% plan to make that change in the next 6 months. For any business, these numbers are daunting. The cost of turnover
that's pretty
is
much everybody.
and could easily devastate workplaces around the country. The Great Resignation caught the business world by surprise. It always held that people needed jobs and so would be grateful for any employment they could get. While this shift in work-life culture might have some scratching their heads as to why people are leaving these once coveted jobs, the common denominator we are seeing as the catalyst for resignations is the decision to no longer accept the unacceptable. According to LinkedIn, 74% of workers indicated that the time spent working from home had caused them to rethink their current position. Several surveys cited stress and burnout as a reason for looking elsewhere, while some voiced concerns with safety in returning to the office. Others pointed to dissatisfaction with cost-cutting actions that would affect employees but leave executive leadership exempt. So, how can your business avoid being front and center during the Great Resignation? Insights from Susan Lucas, Lindsay Legreed, and Philip Kane may be just the advice you need. In Return to Workplace Policies and Procedures, Inc. found that 56% of employees say their organization hasn't even asked for their feedback. This is startling. The most successful leaders make a point to communicate frequently and thoughtfully with employees, surveying what is and isn't working and engaging in dialogue on how employees feel about ongoing policy changes. But be mindful to ask about things you're willing to act on. No amount of trendy office perks or well-stocked snack bars can be a substitute for leadership that puts their employees' well-being first and foremost. Employees want leadership that understand managing in a remote environment is different and requires different skills and training to respect the boundaries of the home office. Engaging effectively without micromanaging and acknowledging the work that is done while not in the office. Employees just want to be recognized. According to Bonusly.com, 63% of those surveyed who have their work acknowledged routinely say they're very unlikely to look for a new job. In addressing workloads, we need to move beyond placations and platitudes. Increasing efficiency and staffing need to be prioritized, making sure that each individual's workload is balanced and manageable. Don't think you can afford to lighten workloads? Recent studies put the cost of employee turnover at up to 2 times the worker's current salary. So in the long run, can you really afford not to? Social anxiety and fatigue are far too common in today's workplace. Employees' mental health can have a huge impact both in work and home, and while some may find comfort in returning to the physical office, others may have concerns. The right solution is most likely going to be somewhere in the middle. Create as much flexibility as possible so your employees feel empowered to make the best decisions for their well-being. From minimum wage increases to shifts in workloads, salary demands have changed over the last year, especially for entry-level employees. With the new $15 minimum wage for government contractors, all businesses are competing for that talent pool, even if they aren't government contractors themselves. That new minimum wage also affects larger market salaries across the board. And while the new higher rate doesn't go into effect until January 2022, employees are expecting that higher rate now. You can get ahead of the curve by checking your employees' salaries against market rates and make sure you're paying them accordingly. Otherwise, you'll just have to replace them with someone else at that same higher rate when they leave. This unique moment in history is an opportunity to transform work as we know it. Businesses and leadership that find themselves adapting with the change in workplace norms and ideals can find themselves thriving, attracting new talent, and retaining their current workforce. So, for those willing to embrace the change, there are some 11.5 million workers and counting looking for new opportunities.
Yep.
Got a lot of thoughts on this.
Yeah, tons. I mean, tons. Like I said, I think we saw this coming from way back when. I knew that people weren't going to want to go back to their jobs. And I think it's for a lot more reasons than they think is going on. But I'd love to hear somebody else's takes on it before I jump into it. Because
one of the first things I wanted to kind of say was, they were talking about the work from home and the stress and anxiety of the workplace and this and that. It's like social media has been training us for like 20 years to live in a digital space and to be digital avatars and to put our time and energy into creating these like curated worlds that we let people see. So when we're in the real world that's not curated anymore and it's right in front of us and we're not able to like curate it to such an extent, I could see where stress and anxiety would come from, especially in a workplace where you could be fired at any moment for saying or doing the wrong thing. So, I just wanted to kind of talk about the social media presence within this video where it's like they don't mention it, but that could definitely have affected people's mindset in the workplace in the 21st century.
Yeah, I definitely think that was leading up to the needle that broke the camel, right? So like you said, like we've already prior to 2019 started living more and more of our life on the internet, more and more of it, and like you said, expressing ourselves and being a person is more done through online. Like we talk about this when you just go see things, like you don't just go to the Grand Canyon anymore. It's like I got to get my picture in front of the Grand Canyon so I can put it on Instagram, and then that's where I get the actual gratification from going to the Grand Canyon. So you're not even really living in real life.
Doing it for the gram.
You're doing it for the gram, right? And so then when they take work, right, and they move that and show that it's possible to be done online through tools like Zoom and all this stuff, and like I think that just really opened people's eyes to how capable the internet is of allowing us to like live almost all facets of our reality. And I people were, my mom's a perfect example. My mom was put at work from home during the pandemic. And so she did her normal job the way she always does it, efficiently, for a year straight from home. And so when it came time to go back to the office, she told him straight up, she's like, I'm not going back to the office. Like she told them, you'll have to prove to me why I need to be in the office, seeing as how I just did this job for a year at home. So why do I need to be there? Right. And they were like, well, can you come in at least 2 times a week? And she was like, all right, 2 times a week, that's fine. Which is what they were saying. You're probably going to be somewhere in the middle because it's just hard. It's just hard to, like you said, define why we were doing all that stuff in the first. If we have all these tools available and they're obviously learned it in school, learned it in work and all that stuff, why would people want to go back,
Yeah, why do you need a receptionist in a world where everybody checks in online?
You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
Like McDonald's and all those places, like you were saying, are already been experimenting with trying to eliminate in-person jobs using technology. And so it's just more industries saw that.
We have Ring doorbells, right? So let's say you want to open up a barber shop. The only person that physically needs to be there is the one person cutting the hair, right? So if you're by appointment only and you fill in your slot with your barber, you don't need literally anybody else.
Yeah.
But every time I've ever gone into a barber shop pre-pandemic, it's like you got the receptionist, you got, it's just people are just sitting around waiting for business.
Yeah.
And you're paying those people to sit and wait there. So it's like it makes sense to the companies in some aspects to continue with this model. But when Amazon starts putting its warehouses in Tijuana, they're figuring out very quickly that people in not America will do these jobs.
They'll go to work. They'll
work their ass off.
They don't even have internet access, so they're down to come show up.
They'll build their fucking hut outside of your Amazon warehouse and fucking start at the bottom.
Get to town, baby. I think that really one of the most telling things about this is it's like, again, this looks like a perfect storm situation to me when it comes to the overabundance of positions available and the underabundance of desire to fill those positions for people that either have been working at home and want to change jobs or haven't been working at all for this whole time. It's the fact that when all of these, you have economic downturn due to lockdowns and stuff like that. And then you have people, and I think you had a good point when you were talking about the way that social media has made us change how we interact in real life. I hadn't really thought about that before. And so you add that in, and then you add in the virus and the fact that being in person is higher risk of virus. And then on top of that, this idea that even if you want to go back to your job in just a few months' time, you might have to get vaccinated in order to keep that job. And so like all of these things are compounding. I look at it as like a spring, and like right now the spring of employment is being depressed, and it's depressed and it's looking for an outlet to burst into. And I think that we're going to see, like you said, a lot of people are going to be like, look, I'm not coming back to the office. I'm not putting on the suits. Like, I wore pajama pants this whole year and we haven't lost any money.
Right.
Like, other than, what we may have been projected to lose because of the pandemic anyways. But like you said, if you can do the work at the same level of efficiency, then there's no reason to go into the office at all. Mm-hmm. And I don't see why that would be a big deal, because in the same way that fast food places where you kind of have to go to are getting rid of the people, the office buildings can get rid of the offices.
Yeah.
Because if everybody's working from their home, then what do you need all of this, space for? Like, you lease this building, and then you have to, like you said, you have snack bars. It's a shit ton of overhead.
I saw this one story about they in the news and stuff, they always do like a point of view story or whatever. But this one lady, because one thing that we're not really talking about with this subject yet is that not only are these people who don't want to go back to the office, but they're like quitting their jobs.
Yeah.
Like straight up. Like they're just like, I'm not working for you anymore, which is interesting. I got an interesting thing about that. But they were talking about this lady, and she quit her job to start her own law firm. She was working at a different law firm, and she quit her job. She said now was just the perfect opportunity to do so because everybody was already shut down and everything. So like doing Zoom meetings and things like that wasn't like this crazy
weird thing. Yeah.
So she could open up her own law firm without having any overhead of maintaining an office and doing all this stuff. And so it was like, right? It was genius. And so it was like she's called it like this perfect opportunity for her to make that transition without having to deal with all that, the consequences of having a brick and mortar style.
Because back in the day, even in 2019, late 2019, if you had called up a lawyer and said, I need to have a meeting about this issue that I got going on, and they were like, yeah, cool, here's my Zoom meeting ID.
You'd be
like, what?
Yeah. I'm not going to pay you to FaceTime me.
You know what? I can't remember what show I was watching. It might have been Curb Your Enthusiasm, but this old dude, he's like an old-fashioned old white guy, really like a well-off businessman. He goes to meet this lawyer that I think Larry David set him up with or whatever, and it's Casual Friday at the office. And so he gets there, and the guy's in like blue jeans and a shirt, and he's like, what the hell's going on here? And he was like, what do you mean? He's like, why are you dressed like that? He's like, oh, it's Casual Friday. He's like, I don't want my lawyer to be casual. He's like, I want my lawyer to be on fucking point. He's like, I want to know that you can handle this. He's like, I can't handle it. And he was like, you're not dressed like somebody that can handle this. He's like, you're dressed like some fucking regular ass guy. I don't want a regular ass guy to be my lawyer. I want a fucking lawyer.
Yeah, but
all that's out the window now.
All that's out the window.
I was gonna say, it brings me to this really interesting point of like, if every law office just wore jeans and t-shirts, it wouldn't be a thing. But they've kind of, it's like the market has kind of been like, okay, if you want a lawyer, you want someone who's serious. So you want somebody in a business tie with a big fat tie and a big shouldered blazer, pinstripe. So you want the slimiest looking suit wearing guy. And it's like, well, and like I can see where like the decorum of the courtroom means that you have to dress a certain way, which means you have to present yourself a certain way to clients. So I kind of get that.
I was just telling you this story when we were in Galveston, but I remember going to court with my dad when I got arrested for having weed at school, and I was wearing Big Lebowski t-shirt that said "The Dude Abides," and I remember the judge called my name and he was like, Marcus Swanson, and I got up there, me and my dad started walking down there, and he was like, otherwise known, he leaned into the microphone and he was like, otherwise known as the dude, and I was like, oh, this is going terribly already. I think the only saving grace was that my dad had like a Korea veteran or something hat on his head, and so he could be like, he was like, oh, this guy's from like a military family or whatever, so he cut me a break. But I like, if I had been there alone, I don't know if that would have gone down so well. They were like, look at this fucking guy, big old afro, getting arrested for weed.
I've seen people get kicked out of the courtroom for not having like the proper
attire. Yeah, your whole case could your whole opportunity to plead your case could be thrown out because you had your pants a little bit low.
Your Jinko jeans, the foot holes are too big.
Yeah, it's like so it's weird. Like
to get us back on track though, or to really hit the point where we're not really even hitting with this, is that, like I said, these people aren't even just not going back to work, they're just not working at all. And so I got to think, obviously I know why this is happening, but all the stuff all the coverage I see, nobody's really pointing to the fact that, like, all right, 50% of people aren't working. How are they making money? Like, how are these people feeling like it's possible for them to live a life without a job? And I know what I think the culprit is. Obviously, unemployment rate, people being paid unemployment over the pandemic skyrocketed as well. And so you have this abundance of federal money coming in, and it's like, no wonder people don't want to work. I remember laughing at people during COVID, or people being really struggling during COVID, because you're working your $11, $10 an hour job, and your homie quit that job because he was afraid of the pandemic or whatever the case may be. And now he's making like $15 an hour on unemployment. And it was almost like this huge slap in the face to the workforce throughout that whole process, where people were like, I could make more money just sitting at home on unemployment than actually working. And it's easy for me to justify not getting this job. And so, I started noticing it. I started noticing all the signs going back up. And then, I was still on unemployment. And so I was just like, seeing all the signs, and I was like, people ain't gonna go back to work. They're not gonna go back to work until this check stopped flowing. Like,
they woke up to the matrix.
You know what I mean?
They woke up to the matrix because
100%.
like before the pandemic, people hadn't really woken up to the matrix. They hadn't thought to themselves like, wait a second, inflation's been going up this whole time, but my minimum wage is under $8.
Yeah.
If I make $8 an hour and I work for 40 hours a week, I can't even afford to be homeless. People kind of woke up to that in the pandemic and were like, so the government's version of minimum wage of what they think that we need to survive is more than what the companies pay us to work 15 hours or 50, in a 40-hour work week. Like, what you would make in a week on unemployment is like way more than what you would make on a week if you were working 40 hours at $8 an hour. So people kind of woke up to that and were like, holy shit. So the government thinks we need this much money to live, but the corporations are only paying us this much money at the bottom. And it's like, well, it's unskilled labor. Yeah, it's only unskilled because there's no unions. It's only unskilled because people aren't taking the time to learn it as a trade and make it into a thing. I use this example all the time, but I could stick anybody and just be like, hey, start working in this grocery store you've never stepped foot in before, and make sure you get an order done at the end of the night for $35,000 worth of goods. And make sure that we need those goods and they won't expire. And it's a tough fucking job. You have to go and you have to learn it, and you have to really try to be a great grocery manager.
I disagree. How long do you think it'd take the average person to learn how to be a good grocery manager?
A few months.
How long do you think it would take to learn how to build a rocket?
That's completely different. You're talking about years and years and years and years of schooling.
Well, that's the difference of skill and unskilled labor. Is like,
they don't mean like there's no skills involved.
But how unskilled? Like, if you took me into a Taco Bell and you slapped me in there, by the end of the day, I could probably make a pretty good Crunchwrap Supreme. Well, how many Crunchwrap Supremes are going to come back? How much food am I going to waste until I'm like a really good, efficient,
like
fast
a day's
worker?
worth? Like you said, maybe a week's worth.
Yeah, but the difference here is that you can't separate the act of doing something proficiently and what it is that you're doing. So like, yeah, you might make the best crunch wrap gordita, whatever the fuck, and waste nothing 100% every time. And that's still not really going to be as valuable to everybody or to whoever's paying the money, to the person that's like, I need this rocket to get us to Mars. Even if you mess that up a couple of times, they still keep paying you because not everybody can build rockets, but you can't teach just anybody to build rockets.
Right.
But you can teach just about anybody to make a Crunchwrap Supreme efficiently enough to where the mistakes don't cost you money in the end. So it would actually, like, if every person that you hired at your Taco Bell made the best Crunchwrap Gordito Supremes, but they all wanted $20 an hour to do that, if you could get the same amount of people that do 80% as well, and they only want $10 an hour, that's totally profitable to you because of a various amount of different things that go into play in the different industries. But this is why certain sectors of the economy get paid less than others, because they're less valuable to the people that are paying the money.
Instead of saying skilled and unskilled, let me say organized and disorganized. Okay. So if all the people that could work at that Taco Bell were organized and said, none of us are going to work at this Taco Bell unless you pay us a livable wage.
But somebody will, though.
Well,
and that's the point.
That's the problem. Yeah, somebody can and will.
Then does that eventually become exploitative if you're just taking the because like some people be willing to work for $3 an hour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think they should be able to do that. I don't think that a company can, like, if every company in America gets together and they're like, we're only going to pay everybody $3 an hour, I don't think that that's good because that's forcing somebody. But if somebody wants to come and undercut you by working the same job for less money, I don't see why we can't let the owner of the business that you work for make that deal.
But okay, so it can get skewed either way, right? So, and that's what I would say. Like, by unionizing and then saying we want $20 an hour, right? You're just trying to skew the value based on, you're trying to strong arm the company now, right?
Well,
like,
you're trying to have a more symbiotic relationship.
Well, but
it's not really
symbiotic because, like I said, you're trying to inflate the value of that work just because now you're organized. Not because the work is more valuable, but just because you're organized and you're saying, well, we're going to essentially blackmail you into making us pay us more. Whereas, like, it could get skewed the other way, too, where if you have a bunch of people who start coming in and undercutting because they don't have any other options or whatever the case may be, then that will hurt the people who are trying to work for the fair value of the work, So I think...
Well, you used the word fair there.
Right.
So what's fair? Is it fair to have, say, wages match inflation?
Yeah, I would say so.
Or
I think that
if profit margins continuously go up, then you continuously to pay people more. Would that be quote unquote fair?
Wait, say
I
it
think
again?
if your rates match your profits.
So, like, every year, let's say your profits go up 2%, the wages you pay your people would go up 2% as well.
I think that's nice. I don't think that's fair. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's something
that's a good policy.
Like, that's something that would be great to see somebody do, like you're involved in this company and we want you to feel like you're involved. And then I think that would promote better workers and people who, like I said, feel more inclusive, and maybe something that they're going to have to start doing, because one thing that's going to definitely happen is corporations are going to have to start skewing their proposition. Even in this video, they called on one of those things being like, say a company fired all their employees, right, because of the pandemic, but they didn't fire their CEOs. You know what I mean? They kept their lead. Like, there's always these policies that affect the lower level employees that don't affect managers, and pay cuts, for instance. You never see pay cuts coming from CEO paychecks, right? They're always coming from like the lower. Mm-hmm. So there's definitely things that they're going to have to restructure in order to entice workers back, because for whatever reason, I think mostly the internet, right? Like, there's so many ways to entrepreneur now. Like, before, you needed startup capital, you needed brick and mortar businesses, but now people are like, I started an online blog and I get 100,000 subs. You know what I mean? Like, there's so many ways for the average worker to make money on their passion projects and stuff, that I think that's what's skewing this whole work proposition. But I don't think it's a unionized thing, because you know me, I do look at corporations as being very capitalistic, and like we said, they're always trying to increase their profit margins, and they're not necessarily looking at the lower class and like trying to take care of you as a person, right? Then that's not their aim. But at the same time, I think that there are values for different types of work. Like we said, like, the reason that somebody gets paid $100,000 to do a job is because there's less people out there available to do that job, and so you're in more demand, and they want to encourage you to go into that position because they need people, and that's the only reason that the Taco Bell guy doesn't get paid as much as the rocket scientist. It's not because that corporation's more friendly or more anything. It's the talent pool.
Yeah, and I'm talking about on the bottom level where we consider what we call like these unskilled like retail jobs and stuff like that. If they were organized, should they ever choose to organize? I think asking for a minimum wage that matches inflation would be a fair ask.
Yeah, okay, because there's nothing wrong with unionizing. Like, I don't have a negative view on unions as an idea. I think personally, when I look at a lot of unions, I think that the leadership in the unions are just as corrupt as the corporations, and I think that a lot of times they're in bed together. But that's neither here nor there.
That's why I said organized, because I didn't want to necessarily say unions.
But yeah, I don't think that there's anything wrong with the employees of a company coming together to increase the amount of influence that they'll have over their business partners, which is the company. Like, you are business partners. You have come together in a partnership. And so if you guys want to collectively come together and be like, look, man, we think that, we want these things, even if those things aren't quote unquote fair to the company. Like, I don't have a problem with them wanting to negotiate better terms. That's pretty normal. But I also don't think that it's wrong or should be against the law or anything for that company to then fire all those people and just get scabs to come in and work those positions. Because, you're taking a risk if you're going to try to organize and come and renegotiate. Anytime you come to a negotiation, there's probably a chance that you might lose something, and there's a chance that you might not gain anything as well. So when you come to the table and you only lose, that's not, you kind of took on that risk yourself. It's like coming to a blackjack table. Like, you might win, you might break even, or you might lose. And so, I don't have a problem with unions, but then again, I think that they're not this amazing or just organizing, because I think what's happening now is you're seeing some sort of loose organization amongst all workers. It's not really organization, because we're not coming together. It's just everybody's moving in a similar direction
that was
right
funny.
now.
I saw a comment on one of these videos that was calling. He was like, now's a good time for all of us to go on strike and demand better. And I was like, honestly, it is, because now you have leverage.
There's a shit ton of strikes going on. They're calling it, there's hashtag Striketober is I don't know if it's trending, but it's been in the higher
against
ranks on the charts of well, not just that. No, I mean, it's Kellogg's, a shit ton of Kellogg's factories. All of their workers are on strike.
But they actually have
airlines,
the leverage. They have. My point was they have leverage now. That was the thing that I was saying with the Taco Bell type situation. All Taco Bell employees get together and they say, we want $20 an hour. Well, you're all fired, and I can rehire another 20 employees at the drop of a dime, because there isn't a real barrier to entry.
They mention it here, though. The turnover costs them more money than paying that fair wage.
In the short term, but to raise all their wages.
All of their wages for
twice
forever?
what they're paying them.
Well, I mean, it just, I can see, like you said, I can see in this day and age with not even just a low minimum wage and not paying people, paying people to be the working poor and having a non-symbiotic relationship with the company and not being able to even discuss unions, but also vaccine mandates. I can see this being the perfect storm.
Oh, it's happening.
It's happening. It could be the perfect storm. Because if you take an entire store, even if it's a Bass Pro Shop, something where you have to know the system to run the cashiers, you got to know how to order, you got to know how to do all these things, and then everybody just walks out. How much money are you losing for every day that you don't have that place fully stocked? You're losing a lot of money. Sure. Now talk about a perishable industry, where you have perishable goods in the back that need to be sold. If you don't have people, if your doors are shut, you're losing tons and tons of money. Sure. So, okay, now I got to retrain and get all these scabs in there. Well, what if they have to cross a picket line? This could be the type of catalyst that the working class needs.
I see this completely backfiring on the people that you're talking about. I think that people that work in office type places, where it's feasible and even possible to do remote type work, but I think people that work at retail stores, fast food companies, warehouses, this is all going to backfire on them completely, because what this is going to do, this is creating a scenario where instead of having this huge pain point of firing all of your employees and having to commission and build all these robots to automate your stuff, that was a huge hit compared to running business as usual and making money. But now that you're not making money, now you're in a position where we're already losing money. We might as well switch over to this thing that we want to do anyways, because it's going to be more effective in the long term. So I think that this is actually presenting for the lower class people. I think this is introducing an opportunity for these businesses to
Move to
ramp
robots.
up the automation that you'll see. Because if everybody walks out of your Bass Pro Shops, that's not as difficult to fill as if everybody walks out of your IT department in your office.
Okay, but so that's why he said, and that's where I'm agreeing with you in the sense that this is the time where that is possible. 10, 15, 20 years ago, right? You walk out of your Bass Pro Shop. Yeah, you're going to hurt them. They're going to take a hit. But it'll take them a month to rehire a whole new store, just like it takes them a month to fill a store when
the economy's booming.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because that was the thing this is interesting too, in the sense of like the powers that be. I always feel like they're puppeteering everything, right? But this seems to be one of those things that they didn't account for happening, because I would assume that the powers that be want you to work at those jobs for as low a wage as possible. They're not trying to encourage you to not do that. And then all of a sudden they have this situation where now 50% of the workforce is not wanting to come back to work. I don't think that they, you know what I mean? I can't imagine that they would design a lockdown or something like that to create that type of scenario. So it's very interesting that that's happening.
Well, that depends though, because having those jobs,
unless they want to bring in robots.
Well, no, I'm saying for the government aspect, having those jobs for those people gets you some tax money. But I could see it being the other way around, where they're actually, maybe they didn't plan it, but they're glad that this is happening because now so many people are now dependent on the government to hand them out their livelihood. And so I don't think that the government's pushing for people to have more independence and they might get a slice of the money you make on this job, but really they'd rather have the control over you by giving you the money themselves.
Well, because a lot of people are on
the slice of money. They can print how much money they want.
There's a lot of people who moved to unemployment, and I think that that's a huge marker for this. But a lot of people, like I said, had to figure out other ways. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people started their own businesses or started, working online or doing gig jobs and stuff. So, yes and no. Yes and no, maybe, because then a lot of the unemployment programs are ending now here soon too. So it's like they're not really doing that.
Unless they
I can understand if they were they rolled out the UBI now and stuff, then I would be more inclined to take on that position. But nonetheless, 20 years ago, absolutely impossible because of what we're saying. You have no leverage. There was probably an army of motherfuckers that would move right in, take that job at the same position. You're out of job now. But now that's not the case, right? Now it's like not a lot of people are
really
out there.
Squeeze on them.
Dude, every single establishment I go to has a now hiring sign on it.
All of them.
I've not been to, everywhere I go to, every Taco Bell, every shipping office, every, corporate job, it's really affecting everybody. And so now is the time to
supply chain disruption,
to grab up everybody at that office, strike or walk out. And the business is going to have to pander to you, because it's not like a market where it's a worker's market right now. It's what they're kind of like houses go up in sellers, and sometimes it's a buyer's market. It's a worker's market right now. They have leverage, and that's why people are negotiating higher salaries, negotiating, hey, I'll come work for you, but I'm not cutting my hair, And they're
no more of this dress code.
Yeah, type shit. And they're all right, fine. I need you here.
Yeah, and that's what I would like to see, a more symbiotic relationship between the low wage, unskilled, unorganized worker and the mega corporation.
But he brings up a spicy ass little fucking curveball to that situation, which is that it's a perfect time to just say, fuck these dudes, robots.
Yeah.
Because,
Third industrial revolution shit.
That's crazy. Because, like you said, a business very rarely does the hard thing to increase in the future, right? Normally it's about maintaining profit margins in the next quarter to 2 quarters, but you very rarely look at 10-year cycles in your business and stuff. But if somebody forces your hand, a lot of times, perfect example is during COVID, they ramped up the amount of city construction projects, right? Because it was like, well, now's the perfect time. Everybody's at home anyways. We can rip up all these roads that we can never rip up because everybody's using them. Right. So same thing. If everybody walks out your Bass Pro and you're like, okay, well, I can't find any new employees out here, maybe now's the perfect time to take a 3-month, 6-month hit and figure out how to fully automate our store. Mm-hmm. And then now everybody's fucked, because
I can imagine storefronts being like
the third,
like you walk in and it's a small area with lots of like screen kiosks like they have at some McDonald's now, where it's like a big screen and you can order. And so it'll just be like a digital catalog, and you'll just walk up to them, scroll through, and they'll be like in the back, there's just like a warehouse where everything's programmed on specific hooks and that they're all numbered and labeled. And so you just pick like, oh, that jacket looks nice. I'm going to try that one on and try these ones on. They'll be like, all right, you've hit your 5 item limit, and it'll just spit those items out at you. You go try them on. And then you just walk back and be like, yeah, I'm going to buy them. And then you just fucking scan your little wallet
I see that
and
in
then
the
walk the fuck out.
future.
Well, I mean, they already have computer aided ordering for the majority of stores, where there's a program, some sort of brain in there that knows you're going to need X number of turkeys because you had X number sell last year around this time,
right?
And you've seen an X amount of increase in profits or whatever. So you know this year we're going to need 17 more turkeys. That's what the computer's telling you.
Yep.
Now, right now, currently, you have a human going over every one of those decisions for the most part. But man, that can't last much longer. That cannot last much longer.
Nah, the humans aren't even making the decisions. They might double check to make sure no mistakes have been made. But right now, what it is right now, once the computer decides that you want 17 more turkeys, you got to send a guy out there to the farm and pick up the turkeys and then freeze them and then take them over here.
That's the part that I think is still going to happen, right? Like, I think even if like today we see like a fully autonomous store is going to be a lot further from now. But I could see you being like, yo, we could wipe out all our cashiers.
Yeah.
Or we could wipe out all of our.
Like, this is like the first big step.
Right. You know, like there's a way that these businesses right now could cut a third of their workforce just by using one simple machine, you know?
I'd be so surprised to walk into a McDonald's in the next 2 years and see somebody physically taking my order. You know what I mean? Like, I've already seen it's already gotten to the point where when you walk in, the people that are at the counter that you would normally give your order to aren't there anymore. They're now standing next to the kiosk, teaching people who don't know how to order on the kiosk how to use it. Right. And I'm like, I remember the first time I saw that, and I just kept thinking like, bro, this is like you're literally, you know that you will not be around here for much longer.
Yeah,
like, you better learn how to work that grill back there.
They're not thinking about that. But
no, of course not.
I think that's the utopian version. Like, you know, like it's sad because I would love to see this be a situation where, like you said, that lower class has the leverage and the opportunity to negotiate with the higher class to bring more equality into the work situation. But I'm afraid that that's just not going to be what happens, right? Like I'm afraid that this will be more of a catalyst for them to try to eradicate them altogether. And so, but my point is, one is a solution that harmonizes and helps our future grow better. And the other solution is going to widen that and strengthen the problems that we're already having, you know, which is that stratification of class and all that stuff. Because here's the problem that becomes with that, right? Here's the problem that comes with that. Unskilled labor is not completely worthless, right? Like there's not to say like there is no value in having somebody who does the menial jobs out there, right? Like somebody that has value. When you wipe that clean, there isn't enough. Everybody can't be a rocket scientist. Right. Everybody can't be a fucking banker or these high profile, high paid jobs. Like they're still very limited in their need, you know? And so it's just going to put a whole class of people just out. I think
that this is the reason why, like, the economy of the future, when I look at it based on all the things that are happening now and following the trends that I see, the economy of the future is one where most people move from retail stuff to attempting entertainment.
It has to be creative.
It has to be some sort of creative thing, like art or entertainment. You know, you start a show like ours, or you start, you know, like you'll have to figure out something that you can do on your own. Because, like you said, once all of these low-skilled labor jobs are gone, there won't be anything for, like, you'll still have to go to school to learn how to be like a plumber and stuff. Like, it'll be a while before we have like robot plumbers, I think. But even now, like, that's not like the easiest thing. Like, you can't just walk up into a place and be like, yeah, I'm going to be your new plumber. They can be like, all right, where's your certification? Like, how many years have you been plumbing? Because like, that's not like that's a trade school type of job. Or like welding, you know? So although welding is a pretty easy job for a robot to do. But I think that those kinds of, like, you'll either have to move into trade work or you'll have to start, you know, learning to code, like that joke, you know, like you'll have to figure out a way to become, if you're not going to separate yourself from the way that the regular retail low skilled job market's going to move. You know, if you're not going to become, instead of the baker at the bakery, the programmer that programs the stove or the oven or whatever, then you'll have to move into a completely different area. And I'm just afraid that people just are not ready to do that.
Here's an interesting curveball for you boys that you might not be aware of. You know, the industries that are hit hardest by this Great Resignation? Like, if you had to take a guess.
I mean, if I had to guess, number one would be like
Travel.
Travel,
travel
yeah,
industry.
restaurants.
It's the technology and finance sectors.
Really?
So these people that we're talking about, the retailers and all that stuff, yeah, I mean, they're taking a small hit, but it's really actually these jobs that are more high stress, frontline workers. That was another big one.
That makes sense.
The nursing field is now devastated, just ravaged. Like nurses quit just because when the pandemic hit, I mean, everybody else got to sit at home and bullshit and do fuck all. The nurses and stuff, they were working 36-hour shifts and shit like that, and like getting burnt out, and they were just. It's getting to be an interesting situation because you have less workers, but you're still trying to fill your same profit margins, your same current status quo. So you have these limited workers that you're now trying to work harder, and then therefore more of them are quitting, and it's like it's gonna.
This is why staffing is I find staffing to be a very overlooked area when it comes to those low skill jobs. I mean, I don't know if
nursing
I've worked
is not a low skill job. Though.
Well, no, but I'm just saying. Well, it's interesting because in nursing is an interesting thing. Like in a regular, like at a store where you're always selling more and more goods, you always have a need for more and more employees, whether that's to maintain the current level due to turnover or to expand. But in nursing, it's different because you don't always have the same amount of people that require medical attention from a nurse or a doctor. And so I think that it's in rare times when everybody else is doing nothing and the nurses are needed like crazy. And because my first thought was like, damn, we should have had more nurses on deck. But then again, I'm thinking like if I ran a hospital, I can't afford to just keep 300
in case
nurses just in case a pandemic pops off, then it's
pops.
because there's a huge shortage in that sector, like you said. Like I never thought about that, but like tons of nurses are quitting or changing. Like I've like on dating apps, a lot of girls are into being registered nurses, and a lot of them are saying like, like I'm in school for nursing right now, but I'm not really sure if that's what I want to do, with everything going on. And I was like, damn, like I never thought about that. Like it seems fine when it's the way that you picture it, but you don't ever think of like when the shit hits the fan, and then you're like, well, then what are you asked? Like what's asked of you when that happens?
Yeah, no shit. Here's an interesting idea with this whole situation that kind of hit me as we were having this conversation. You remember communism? One of the things that Karl Marx proposed was that when the state takes over and regulates all these jobs and everything, that more people would be able to be free to pursue the careers that they wanted to, right? They'd be able to essentially work on their passion projects, right? And then that was like the end goal for communism, was to free you from the slavery that is labor and allow you to, chase your own ambitions and desires. Is it kind of fascinating that maybe capitalism is about to deliver on that dream that communism said that it would give you? Because, we're looking at it from this very dystopian view of like, they're replacing all the jobs and all this stuff, but they're replacing all the jobs and stuff. And most of these people who are quitting, they're citing things like that, more time to work on things that I want to work on and passion projects. I mean, if you look at us, like during the pandemic, we decided, hey, this is a great time for us to kick up our podcast and be podcasters for the rest of our lives and stuff like that. And there's tons of people out there that are doing that very thing. They're taking their YouTube channel seriously, or the books that they want to write and stuff. And they're going off on these things that they've always wanted to do. And I don't know. I'm just saying that maybe it's actually working for us.
You pointed towards capitalism, maybe point towards democracy, because we might end up with universal basic income. That's something that's been floated in America. It might end up happening. We might get paid to be Americans. What would you call that? A floor. You know what I mean?
But that's built on capitalism. Like we only have the money to be able to do that.
But what I'm saying is it's not like the corporations are doing it. It would come from the government. It would be the government cutting all adults a basic living check
Mhm.
to try to, I mean, and like, I don't know if it'll work or not. I don't know what positives and what negatives would come. Would it erase homelessness? If every homeless person was getting a check every month, who knows? They might just put it in their arm. You know what I mean? So it's not a fix all or a catch all, but that's a pretty
But that's cool to
communist
see that.
ideal.
Mhm.
Like, that's pretty communist to think about. The idea that every American would essentially have a safety net sitting underneath them
Mhm.
so that, you know, no child will go hungry.
Mhm.
No old woman who can't work, you know, is going to, you know, die broke or in debt.
Yeah.
Like, this could be a positive thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree in the sense that I'm optimistic on the turnout. I mean, I'm optimistic on automation in general. I think it's going to be a net positive for society at large in the long run. But just like all great changes that have come before it, there's going to be a certain section of people that lose everything due to that change.
Sure. Sure.
And I mean, the biggest example that I like to use is just the automobiles and how it just completely wiped out horse and buggies. And there was an entire sector of an economy centered around horses, caring for horses, selling and buying horses, carriages like that. You used to make a lot of money if you could build a good horse carriage or like make a good saddle. All of those people went completely under because it's like, there's no need for you anymore. And that's unfortunate. But I think obviously in the long run, we can see like, okay, cars have been extremely beneficial to humanity in general. And unfortunately, it's unfortunate that some people had to take the brunt of that change on their own. But, you know, you might look back at it as like a sacrifice for future generations or something like that. Like, hey, we're sorry that the future is imposing these costs on you right now,
Yeah,
but
as an
it'll pay
individual.
off in the long run for everybody else.
I have a great proposition for you. Laws and government regulation can swiftly change entire industries. They can come down and say, well, in America, you can't do that anymore. Our data, if our data was not publicly shared, like if we controlled our data, if every time we decided to use our phone and go somewhere, like that data that we were creating, what the traffic's like right now, how many people are in that area, you know, things like that. Like if that was a commodity as opposed to something that is just collected with our free terms of agreement for using the app. If they came out and said, okay, you can't have people's data anymore. Would the government or would the corporations and would they still want that data?
Yeah.
Would someone still want that? Would that data be valuable?
It depends on which, like how the law is structured. Like if they're saying like you guys can't store and hold ownership of the data, but it's still perfectly okay for you to monetize it and make money off of it, then yes, I think that they will want it. If it includes a thing where it's like you're no longer able to take this data and use it for advertising, then I think that would completely disrupt the entire, because I mean that's how they make the money is by selling advertising places the data about you so that they can better advertise towards you. So if it's just saying like you no longer, because a lot of people don't realize,
But he's not
like,
saying that they don't get to use the data.
Yeah,
they just
like,
don't
they
get
would just have to buy
they
it
don't
from
get to
you.
harvest
Yeah.
it off
Yeah.
you
oh
without
well, buy it from you.
Pay a subscription fee. You want to
subscribe
So
to
a
my data.
subscription, yeah, and
subscribe to my data.
a subscribe to my data fee. That's interesting. That
I
would
mean,
be
that's
an
cool,
interesting. That would be an interesting change. I think it'd be interesting because right now I think everybody's data is valuable, but at that point you would start to.
Facebook would cost money, I'll tell you that much.
Well, it would cost money, yeah, because the only way that I could see them keeping it where the app is free, but them still
Like where's
getting the
their profit
data,
from?
then what they do is they'd have to. It's actually funny. It would actually, the way that I'm thinking about it now, would be bad for privacy because then the advertisers would want to be sure that the people that Facebook is getting the data from are people that are receptive to the advertising, which is already a thing, but it would be even more of a thing. So then Facebook would have to know a lot more about you, how many times you buy things from ads and all kinds
But
of
they
other
don't-
information that would be valuable to have to then sell to the advertisers.
Well, like they said, but he said that they would still have all that. Like they have all that now, but they would just, instead of them just getting it for free because you're on their app, they would have to pay you to sell that data to somebody else.
My thought process was, if I got on in a car or on a bike with a little GPS device in my pocket, which is my phone, and I went somewhere and I was giving the data to Google or to whoever of how many people were there, how congested it is, what is this business busy right now? Is it not busy? Like those type of things, just based off of like my phone and me physically being there, it seems like it would be worth something. It seems like that would be a job. Like that would be an area of creation, a gig job that could eventually exist.
But that's only valuable to them because they're not getting information about all of those other people from your phone. They're getting that information from their phones as well. So the only way that they know that it's busy at the place that you went to is not because you're there with your phone, but because everybody's there with their phones. So if you have 50% of those people don't sell their data to Google, then the efficacy of having that in there, like a feature, is reduced.
Well, I'm thinking of it. Yeah, I'm thinking of it outside of the box. I'm thinking of it like, I have my phone. Okay, I go to this business. It looks crowded. Okay, so hey Google, this business is crowded right now. Mm-hmm. Okay, it's a 20-minute wait to get a sandwich. Which would totally
be a job.
Yeah, it seems like that would be an area.
Data tracking or something. Yeah, like your job is to go around and collect that data for them. But this is the part that we're missing with this. Google is free. YouTube is free. Facebook is free. It's not free. You're exchanging your data to use the app for free. So if they no longer got to just take that data by far, then they have no value proposition to create a YouTube or a Facebook, because how are they making money? They give you a free app and then they have to buy your data from you. Like, it's like they're just hemorrhaging money to do. Essentially, like I said, what would happen is they would just start charging you to use their app. Yeah. And then you might be able to sell your data back to them or whatever the case might be. But that's the value exchange, is like, you pay me in data, Yeah.
I think the way it'll work out is that it'll go to, with our luck, it'll go to subscription where you have to pay to be on there, but then they'll still have all the data.
Yeah, exactly.
You're all still on there.
Because you're talking about,
he said there would be a
it's
law.
Not like I don't envision a future, even if all of the apps do switch to subscription based, where there's no ads on them.
Yeah. Well, he said there'd be a law.
I'm saying, like, you talked about the value exchange, and it's like, what if my data is worth so much more fucking money everything than $1 a month to use Facebook, or a subscription monthly to one of these places? Like, if that's skewed in such a way to where the government steps in, is like, you guys are making trillions of dollars on these people's data that you're harvesting in your terms of use or whatever. If they came in, and I'm not saying the government should step in and just, you can't have data anymore, these are the rules. I'm saying it can happen. We live in a society I don't necessarily agree with. So even though I don't think that's a necessary nice thing for our government to do, it might end up happening. They might just come in and say that our data is not, you can't collect it for free anymore, even though the NSA is doing it.
Yeah. But if they decided all of a sudden they wanted to care about the privacy of the individual, and then they would like to ban that. And then, yes, I could see a market coming about where we're like, hey, we'll harvest that data for you. I'll just be the eyes and ears. Collector, and I'll just go out there and type it up. But like you said, I think it's more.
There are Google street cars out there for that.
Yeah, I think
they got cameras. They've already got cameras on them. They're just going to count the people in the images.
They would buy your data from you at that point. But then, like I said, they would offset that cost by charging you to use the app.
Or they'd have to charge the advertisers more or something to account for the money that they're paying you to get the data.
Yeah.
I think that would completely change the way that advertisers, like, that's the way advertisers do it now, is by getting the data from the companies. But I think that if it came to the point where, I think that it would drastically change it in such a way that they would completely have to change course on how they target audiences for their stuff.
I'll tell you this, though. It's interesting. As you keep presenting these thought experiments, I keep thinking about how there's no way to rig it to where more comes down to the bottom. No. There is no way. No. Like, it doesn't matter how
profits
you try.
Will go up.
They will find a way. If anything were to change in the skew, like I said, they're not going to pay you $20 an hour. they'll just hire robots. Like they're always going to find a way. And that I think is the big problem. And that you're probably trying to point to is that there's never any way to balance out that because of the way that
we don't
they
have enough
operate.
goddamn leverage.
If they make the minimum wage $15, they're just gonna fucking put a fucking factory in Mexico. That's what they're gonna fucking do.
Or just raise the cost of all the goods, so it did you no good anyways.
Instead of taking it out of the profits or taking it out of the bonuses or the highest paid earners in the company, they'll just raise the prices.
Looking to the example that you pointed out, Rod, when you were talking about how it might end up being a benefit because then it'll free up all these people to discover their passions and find a way to make money doing that. I think that I personally don't have a problem with the wage gap as long as the whole table is moving up. I'm not too concerned with how far apart the people at the top of the table are from the people at the bottom of the table, as long as the people at the bottom of the table are still
But have you seen the
having
graph,
a
though?
raising. Well, it depends on what graph you look at, because if you look at it in living standards, everybody's living standards are going up. Some people's living standards are going up higher than others. But again, I'm not concerned about that if everybody's living standards are going up. If 50% of people's living standards were all going down, well, the same thing was happening for the top 50%, then I would have more of an issue with it.
But like
Nobody's
John
buying
was-
heveryone's everyone's in debt.
John was
Well,
pointing out,
that is their own doing.
that
I mean,
rate
you don't
of-
get into debt forcefully.
that
Nobody
rate
puts
of
you into
growth
debt.
isn't even keeping up with inflation though. So I mean, inherently we are losing because, like he said, we're not even like we're getting better, but not even near incrementally or exponentially tied to the top.
You're only
So the
looking at it from a
is
monetary
skyrocketing.
standard, which is why I focused on living standard. Yes, we're making less money proportionally than we should be based on inflation and all those things, but I'm talking about living standards in the sense that you're much more well off generally, maybe not financially, but generally than people hundreds of years ago, in the sense, like there's lots of different examples, but most people have cars. Most people have air conditioning in their houses. Most people
Not their houses,
have
their apartments that they're renting because nobody owns houses anymore.
whatever. Some people don't want to live in houses, so you make it seem like living in an apartment is inherently worse than living in a house.
I'm making the point that 50 years ago, if you had taken the average 35-year-old, they owned a house.
Okay.
But if you take the average 35-year-old today, they don't. They
And
rent.
you're saying that this means what, though?
I'm saying that it's a difference in living standards when you're renting and you're paying a landlord as opposed to owning a piece of property.
and having like
That's
a
completely
owner.
different living standards.
That's
In
true.
one, you have an investment that is a thing
Building
that's
value
worth
for
money,
you,
that's
yeah.
building value. And the other, you're literally just burning money to
These
to
are
live.
individual financial decisions, though. Like, but the
But the
You
entire
can't
when
break
the
it down to
entire thing
individual.
has
We're
shifted
talking
over
about
time.
a whole macro thing, like
Yeah.
you said. So the whole of the bottom class went from owning houses and making a 50,000.
But there's so many more variables in there than how much money people are making.
I'm not
Most
saying it's
people
just-
live in cities
yeah.
where there's not enough room to build individual houses for every single person. So you make a sacrifice. You don't own a house, but you live in an apartment in an area that you like to live in a city. There's plenty of houses. There's plenty of empty houses around for people that could afford them to buy them if they wanted to. They just choose not to. So the fact that less people own houses now isn't inherently something that can be used in this conversation, because there's so many other reasons why people don't own houses.
I think
So
you can
what
point
would
towards
you-
the monetary reason though, because if you take the average wage of that worker in 1950 and look at, okay, what's the median wage or yearly wage, and then look how much a house costs, and then do that same comparison today, it's skewed so much.
And I'm saying that there's way more things going into it that isn't necessarily a negative thing.
What are some of those things that you would say that have helped the standard of living for the bottom class?
Medicine, technology, like
They
all
can't
technology.
afford medicine.
Huh?
They can't afford medicine. So that's
Even
not
if you
a good-
can't afford
just
it, I
'cause
mean,
there's
life-saving
out there
medicine
doesn't mean that
is
it's helping the bottom class.
But you're missing the point in the sense that less people are dying from medical causes because of the fact that maybe they don't have insurance, but if you get shot, somebody's going to help you take the bullet out of your body. They might not give you the pain medication that you would like to have afterwards, but they save your life. And that's happening more in these modern capitalistic societies than they ever have in sub-Saharan Africa or something like that. People die of all kinds of crazy shit all the time. Just to look at it in a historical perspective, the president of the United States' son died because we didn't have access to antibiotics back then. But now, considering if you have a life-threatening illness, they give you antibiotics for free.
And you would say that the creation of antibiotics is related to the skyrocketing, that's because the rich have billions and billions of dollars, so we get antibiotics?
No, the rich have billions and billions of dollars because they're saving everybody's lives and they're giving them their money. That's what I'm saying. The causation is the other way around. They don't have billions of dollars and then they made antibiotics. They make antibiotics and it's completely world changing and it saves so many people's lives that they end up accruing lots of money because they're now super valuable to everybody. And so what I'm saying is that the people that become richer than the people at the bottom may be getting richer faster than the people at the bottom, but that's only because they're giving things that the people at the bottom are paying them for. So not everybody. Obviously, some people are out here stealing money, but that's not a majority of cases. So as the rich people come up with new inventions, new things that improve everybody's lives, they start out expensive and only rich people buy them. And then they become less and less expensive. And then regular people have them. And then they become so ubiquitous that just in the 1970s, only like 5% of households had color television, even though color television has been around for 20 years. Now, everybody, if you walked into somebody's apartment, even if they have a single bedroom apartment and they have a color TV.
A color TV compared to the billionaires that have an entire wall of their house that is a TV, right? So like just because inventions and things are coming into the world, that doesn't mean that that's helping the bottom class. You know what I mean? Like my instance is
they think it's helping them. They all have TVs.
Right, yeah, they got TVs, but that doesn't mean that they have, like you're saying, because they have access to 1970s TV, they're now equal or better off. Like, no, to today's standard, having a color television isn't a thing. Like, that's not to say like, that's, whatever. To today's standard, they're still at a far disadvantage to the people who are getting like super megalithic televisions and things like that.
I would think about it like this.
But they're at an advantage based on the people who were super megalithic before. So everybody's moving up.
But the guy who created the TV wasn't a megalithic rich guy, hypothetically.
Maybe not. I don't know.
But so my point is to say that there are more
focusing
inventions.
on this one maybe superfluous example of the
you're
TV,
saying the invention of
so
medication and the invention of TV, the invention of electricity and all these things.
I mean, birth control. Birth control is
completely independent.
Cultural changing.
That's completely independent to the wage gap and like the living standards for the extremely wealthy to the bottom.
The wage gap and the living standards are separate things. Your income is not directly linked to your living standards. There's also, it's not the only thing that makes up your living standards.
No, I get
There's
what you're saying.
All kinds of societal
I get what you're saying. I'm glad that I live in America where I have plumbing and hot water and electricity and all those things.
Good living standards.
Yeah,
stuff.
that's great. That's great. That's great. But my point is that is not a correlation of like, these guys got uber mega rich and so they gave us toilets, right? Like toilets are like an invention that came into the planet and then everybody started using it, right? But my point is to say that the top who are extrapolating and getting rich way faster than the bottom. And it's like, well, yeah, but the bottom's getting drug along. They're not necessarily. They're just benefiting from the inventions or the creations of things into the world.
And I have a great example.
I mean, they are being drug along.
And I have a great example here. Healthcare. So 50 years ago, let's say you worked for a company and you had okay insurance or whatever, but it wasn't the best. And you had to like pay a copay. Let's say you had a colitis attack or they had to cut out a piece of your intestine or they had to do some sort of surgery. That was like, yeah, like maybe you should have eaten better, but whatever, dude. Like you had this thing happen and your insurance helps in some way. You don't go bankrupt. Okay.
Well, the surgery, you're also today.
Let me finish.
Okay,
Because I saw a guy that he showed one of his bills the other day on my Facebook and it was for $97,000. And that was for an ambulance ride, a night in the ER, an emergency appendectomy, and a recovery day, and then he went home. It's $97,000.
Yes.
And his insurance covered some of it, but he's going to be paying that bill for the rest of his life. I never heard of my parents doing that. I never heard of my parents back, when they were in their 30s having an emergency surgery and then being in debt for the rest of their life and having that go to collections.
Okay, well, that's anecdotal, though. I mean, people, just because it's really expensive now doesn't mean that it wasn't out of people's living standards or income back in the day.
Healthcare costs have risen.
Yes, and healthcare effectiveness has also risen. Now, we'd have to look into a large swath of data to find out, has the effectiveness of healthcare gone up in the same proportion to the cost of healthcare? Because maybe they're just raping us. I don't know. I'm not a doctor, so I don't know how much it costs. But I will tell you that I would much rather pay more for a surgery where they had to cut out a piece of my intestines today than pay less for it 100 years ago.
What about the EpiPen?
Because I would be much more likely to have some sort of other condition come about from that surgery back then than I do now.
That's a function of the uber rich, though?
I don't think it's a function of the uber rich. What are you talking about?
You can point to the EpiPen and say, like, okay, this thing that's designed to save lives for people who are having that allergic reaction.
Yes.
They set the price. It doesn't cost $1,000 for an EpiPen.
Okay.
So,
and it's to say that it's out there in the world and it's for $1,000, but it's still not accessible to the poor people. And then I don't understand how it's better for them. Like, what? It's like saying, oh, well, you're better off because you have access to a toilet. You live on the street. You don't really have access to a toilet. And then this person has 50 toilets. And that to say, like, well, he's better off because there's toilets in the world. Well, he's not really, because just because it's out there and, like, yeah, you get to experience it. And like I said, it's happening, but on a nationwide level, I don't think that happens due to what we're talking about, which is the stratification of classes, right? That's because America as itself, as a whole, is stratified from the rest of the country. But my point is, and this is not even my point. Like, look at the uber rich. They're even saying this is a problem. It's not like they're not even saying like, no, this is totally within economic. Like, I get what you're saying. Like, if the floor were to raise, but I don't really see no data out there. I haven't seen it. And I look forward to seeing some of where that's happening, because the graphs that I've seen are like swoop with the rich and like.
That's why I said it depends on what graphs you look at. If you look at income,
they're better.
Yeah, it's a disparity. There's an income disparity. But that's not the only kind of graph that you can look at. That's why I was saying there's all kinds of other points of data that you could look at of explaining why people's lives are better now than they were before. And that's the main reason why somebody would give somebody else their money, is because they feel like giving them the money for whatever product or service they're getting in return is going to better their life. And so you may not agree, like maybe it was dumb for all the people to buy color television. I don't know. But all I'm saying is that
I would say that's a function of evolution, though.
What is?
The fact that our lives are quote unquote better than they were back then.
Well, it's easy to say that, but somebody has to do that somewhere.
Right.
Like,
and that doesn't tend to be the uber rich that are doing that. Like you said, like the guy
they might become uber rich after they do it. I mean, Jeff Bezos wasn't always uber rich.
Sure.
And then he did something that lots of people found value in, and now he's uber rich.
Right.
And he continues to do things that people find value in. Otherwise, he wouldn't be uber rich anymore.
If we tie the economy to the standard of living, which is what we're trying to, I guess I'm trying to say, is tying the economy to the standard of living. It's like debt has increased in lower income households. Housing ownership has decreased. Medical costs have risen. Like, these are not positives. These are not things where the standard of living is raising. These are instances in where the standard of living, you could argue, is decreasing. So I'm not saying overall, like, it's not better that we have clean toilets. You know, like, that is a standard of living increase. Like, we're not dying of malaria. That's a great standard of living increase. But if I look at our economy, we have the richest economy in the world.
Right.
Our lower class is not going anywhere. It's getting bigger.
Mm-hmm.
The gap is increasing. The lower class is getting bigger. Less people are working for lower wages. Our debt is increasing. Nobody's buying houses. These are the lower class not raising because the stratospheric rich are raising. It is staying or shrinking the middle class. It is growing the lower class. And the only one who seems to be benefiting more than anybody else are the 65 billionaires that own 90% of the wealth.
Because like we talked about in a different episode too, like, you can't hold George Washington to the standards of a man today. it's not the same. You know, like you said, it was completely acceptable to own slaves back then. It's not acceptable now. And so to say, well, my standard of living is better than it was in 1880, right? Well, different times. So, you know what I mean? Like the cost of living is a lot more than it was in 1880. You know, the supply chain, everything is different. And so, I mean, I do see evolution as like, okay, cool. We live in the greatest time in human history, period, right? And that will only continue to increase. But within that microcosm, there seems to be problems in the way that it is evolving. You know, like the lower class is not evolving at a fast enough rate as the high class. Because like I wouldn't mind if that graph went like that. Like you said, I wouldn't mind if it was both a steady graph and then they were moving
but
at
there was like a
rate.
constant gap.
Like an equal rate.
Yeah,
right? Like
I see what you mean.
The rich are
The
getting
problem is that
uber rich, but it's
far
widening.
apart. Yeah.
And every day it gets wider and wider and wider. And we keep asking ourselves, like, how far could that go before it becomes...
it's not going to go much further. I mean, at a certain point... Well, I just want to bring this up because you guys actually both hit on things that I think this thought experiment will shed some of the way that I'm looking at it, maybe. So if we look, I would argue that in the past, in the medieval times of the reign of monarchies and stuff like that, the upper class was very, very tiny and the lower class was massive. Pretty much everybody else outside of the nobles and the court and all that stuff.
True.
And at some point throughout the 20th and 21st century, we figured out a way to make it to where that gap had shrunk drastically, where more people were in a middle class. There was a middle class, but now there's a ton of people in it. There was a few people in the lower class, and then there was a lot of people in a higher class that were getting a lot higher. And then over time, we started to shrink back into that time where the upper class are just starting to pull away from everybody else, and the lower class is growing. The middle class is shrinking. So we're starting to divert back to whatever it was that was keeping us in those times before. And I think that what shapes me is that looking at the things that we did when the middle and lower class, when the middle class was growing and the upper class was getting richer and then the lower class was shrinking, I try to look at those things and say, what were we doing as a society then that caused all of these things to happen? Or can we find some strong correlation so that maybe we can have an idea? We won't have causation because there's too many variables. But if we look to those times when it was doing what we wanted to do, we can emulate that now. And because I'm not trying to defend like the wage gap inherently. I just think, like, as I usually do, I'm trying to point out that it isn't all doom and gloom per se. Like, yes, we should combat the idea that they're pulling away at such a far rate. Like, that's alarming. Because again, it harkens back to a time when kings and shit were running around and you had to eat bread all day. So I definitely don't want us to come back to that level. And so we're going to have to do something. But that's not, but I'm also just saying, like, as a caveat to that, a lot of people are doing a lot better now, and we can figure out a way to keep that going on for more and more people.
Well, I'll lend to your point too, which is where I've always gotten to, which is like, I would much rather be poor in America than poor in really anywhere else. You know what I mean?
Like, I mean, yeah, that's like maybe being, like Denmark or something.
You know what I mean? But I would much rather be poor in America
Definitely not anywhere in Africa.
than poor in like Kenya or some shit like that, right? Like,
it's a different kind of poor.
It's a different kind of poor, and that is an extrapolation of the fact that we have so much wealth within our own nation. You know, like, I mean, you could even count us in that kind of graph of like in the world skew version of like how America just keeps going like this, and the third world countries are like.
I mean, I think globally it only takes $34,000 now to be in the 1%. So
yeah, right.
Globally, I mean, so that's including everybody.
Yeah,
you make a great point though. America might be rising exponentially, like the 1%, and keeping the lower class like countries in South America and Africa down. By design, to some extent.
I mean, that's not surprising to me. Like when you see
the history
when
book.
you see your leader doing some fuck shit at work. It's not uncommon to see all of their employees doing some fuck shit at work too. So it's like, if you're the number one richest country and all of the people in your country are being stratified in a wage gap, why wouldn't that be the same for your country compared to other countries?
I think it's something that isn't, it's the negative downside of capitalism, right? Like people try to act like capitalism is a holy grail, and it's just not really. It's a good system. Like, don't get me wrong, it's better than most systems out there. But one of the problems is that it does breed individual interest, right? Like, and that's just inherently like you can swing too far left or the other way, which is like total 100% inclusion of everybody. But then capitalism can tend to swing the other direction, in which it's like, it values individual interest over the good of the whole.
Shmee.
You know what
about
I mean?
shmee?
Like, you know, it's just like, and inherently there's some, even when we were talking about how do you fix this thing, there is like, they inherently are not trying to fix it, right? Because there's no incentive to, there's really no reason to. It's like, my game that I'm playing is profit. And you are just a machine, a cog in my profit game. And I'm not really thinking about you as an individual worker and what you have to do when you go home to your family and how you live on the wage that I provide you. I'm just looking at it as like, I want to get this profit. You're a part of it. How much do I need to pay you? Okay, cool. I'm always going to try and figure out how to pay you less. You know, just like I'm always going to try and figure out how to get my products made for less and everything, because my game is profit.
That's not entirely the case. I mean, there's lots of, especially today, there's lots of really awesome companies.
And I wish there was more.
And I wish there was more.
Saying. It's like that.
But I think that's why I'm more of a defender of capitalism, because again, that's not inherently part of capitalism. That's just part of the people that are running these companies that are greedy or whatever you want to call it. I think that because of the fact that capitalism highlights the individual choices that people make and gives them the freedom to make those choices without having to explain themselves to third parties and things like that. I think that because of that ideal, I prefer that to a lot of other ones, but in the same way that completely unregulated markets are also very bad, because then you can have like polluting of rivers and shit. And it's like, hey man, 60 miles down that way, there's a whole town that's got to drink out of that river, and he could just be like, I don't really give a shit. But that's not necessarily because of the system. The system is set up in a way that it might create that opportunity for somebody. But if he wasn't a scuzzbag, the opportunity being there isn't necessarily enough to make him do that.
So what makes ethical creation and ethical consumption under capitalism a thing? Like what allows that?
A lessening of consumerism, in my viewpoint. I thought about that a lot. But like, I think that if you're a more conscious consumer, you're more conscious about who you give your money to. And by doing so, you're shifting the power in the direction that you want it to go. Because I think that we're all aware that the money is the power. Like, that's how the corporations have so much power in the government. It's like because of the money, the amount of influence that they can bring about because of their money. So I think that and we as consumers give them that money. So if we give money to people who stand with our values, then I think that it shifts. It's a slow burn, but I think that it shifts the tide culturally. Which I think is why a lot of companies we've talked about this in the past, a lot of companies are now having values, which is kind of annoying at some point. But then again, if we accept if we accept that the actions that companies take on our environment and in our society have large ramifications, then we have to accept that our individual purchasing habits directly link to those activities. Because if we don't buy from Amazon, then Jeff Bezos has less money. And if you think Jeff Bezos is doing fuck shit with his money, then you would have to change your habits to be in line with that.
I agree. Whatever. People quitting their jobs. I think rightfully so. You know,
yeah,
like I said, whether or not this turns out to be a good, I mean, obviously I think it's going to be a really painful thing in the short term, you know, like I said, like man, it's just so, we're living in such a fascinating time because so much is starting to get shook up, and it's something that we said should happen. You know, like I said, I think we're finally starting to see real ramifications in society of the creation of the internet. And when you talked about, you kind of been talking about a third industrial revolution and stuff, I think that's coming through tech, right? Like tech and the creation of the internet specifically, I think is like that once in a millennium type invention that changes the way the whole society operates.
3 aspects: communication, energy, and transportation.
Yep.
That's what really affects an industrial revolution.
And we're seeing that in communication.
We've seen it in communication with the internet. We're seeing it in energy with solar, with alternative energy sources, wind, things like that. Nuclear that's one they didn't have, back in
I wish they figured that shit out.
Yeah. But then we also have transportation because we have autonomous vehicles, we have drones, we have, these jets that like Lear jets and things like that. So it's happening.
Yeah.
Whether we like it or not, there's a 3rd industrial revolution happening. And
we got to make sure that we're not the horse and buggy guys.
Well,
Right, essentially, right?
That's
for
what
one.
we got to do.
That for one. And also we need to be aware of the consequences it's going to have. I mean, if Ted Kaczynski's to be believed, the industrial revolution and its consequences have been very bad for human society.
That's the thing is it's going to suck in the short term. I think in
We'll
the
have to
short
get used
term,
to it.
it's going to be really tough because the thing about it is, like we said, like it's cool that everybody's learning how to work on the internet and not having to go back to their jobs and stuff. But what's that going to do for you when you're trying to get your cheeseburger at McDonald's? Dude, I went to Dairy Queen the other day and they said, we're only serving ice cream right now because we don't have enough employees to serve anything else. Like they literally just were at too short of a staff that they just were not offering anything but ice cream. And I'm just like, is that going to extrapolate? Like you said, if we run out of nurses, what's going to happen when you go to the hospital and you need to have aid?
This goes to
and there are just no nurses available.
This goes to my point of organized labor. It may be unskilled.
Yeah.
You may think that, okay, the guy who drives the truck from the warehouse to the store and then unloads it and then puts that stuff on the shelf and then orders more next week, like it seems unskilled. But if those people are organized within that company, if the warehouse workers, the truck drivers, the stockers, the cashiers, the customer service people, if all those people stop, it's not that simple to just go in and plug those holes. Now, it is to some extent because during COVID, I was a scab. I got plugged in from working in a little store into a warehouse. And I got to see firsthand how a scab operates. And it's scary because I didn't have any fucking training. I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. And I was slapping together these fucking pallets that were trash compared to what somebody who could do it faster or more efficiently could do. So even though I was probably hemorrhaging the corporation money, they felt the need to not pay the wages or to put in the proper health concerns for people because they were like, fuck it. We got a guy who could do the job at 60%. It'll keep our profits rolling through COVID.
You got some real Jimmy Hoffa vibes. Like when you were talking, I just kept picturing that Al Pacino speech in The Irishman where he's like, the day our truck stops, America stops.
I am very much, and this is why you're not allowed to talk about unions in these jobs.
Yeah.
Because talking about organized labor will get you fired because it's against the law because they don't want you to realize that if the warehouse workers, the drivers, the cashiers, the stockers, and the deli workers and the meat cutters and everybody decided one day to step outside and hold up a sign that said, pay us a minimum wage of $15, that it would work.
Yeah.
It would work at Target. It would work at Kohl's. It would work at fucking Dairy Queen.
Well, if they're going to do it now,
General
is the time.
strike.
If they're going to do it, now's the time because, like I said, they actually have leverage right now in the economy and the way it's set up. But
Can you
one more
imagine?
point that we didn't hit that
I would love to see it.
I have to get it in here is these vaccine mandates are not helping the situation.
No, they're not.
helping the situation.
You don't fire 80,000 healthcare workers in the state that was hit the worst with COVID over vaccine mandates when there's a shortage of healthcare workers. Like, I just don't understand. And I thought it was dumb already. And I'm talking about the governor of New York and the vaccine mandates there and everything and how she's going to have to lay off, like, estimates are like 80,000 healthcare workers because they're not going to get vaccinated. Or at least those are the numbers of people that aren't vaccinated now. So I'm assuming some of them will be, but some of them won't. But then she was talking about how she was going to bring in the National Guard to fill those positions. And I heard some people saying like, oh, now you're going to have a fucking grunt soldier doing, first aid on you, like field dressing you or whatever. And I was like, doctors work in the National Guard. Like they have medics.
Yeah.
But the thing that I didn't think about is that the National Guard is like a reserve thing So like you only do it when you're called upon and you have like a regular job somewhere else. So if you're a medic in the National Guard, it stands just like you're probably in the medical field somewhere. So she's just going to take the rest of New York State's medical people from their hospitals and dump them in Manhattan. Just to put the spicy gentrification on there and be like, the rich people in Manhattan and New York and shit, they're going to get healthcare. But you people in Connecticut and whatnot, none of y'all going to get healthcare.
Here's another great headline. So I saw something where like, sheriff's departments are being like, we will not enforce the vaccine mandates on our cops and our sheriffs and our COVID was the #1 killer of police officers in America for the past 2 years.
Well,
really?
Yeah. COVID killed more police officers than anything else. Anything else that was a metric they used more than any other.
Wow.
So I thought that was interesting.
It is.
That because it's not the biggest community. Law enforcement's not the biggest community. It's pretty small.
Very small.
Now, but it's also complicated because there's so many unique districts and unique offices of police and sheriff's deputies and stuff like that we don't actually know how many there are. Yeah. There actually is no actual real number. We just know it's like 1,200. We have an estimate, but we don't know for sure.
And that's the interesting, like, you'll see some sheriffs do this because sheriffs are county elected officials. But like a municipal police department, I'd be very surprised to find out that a municipal police department was like, we're not going to vaccinate our police officers.
This morning, the battle over vaccine mandates for law enforcement officers reaching a fever pitch in Washington state, where workers are required to be fully vaccinated by today or risk losing their jobs. A state trooper's final sign-off attacking the governor going viral.
This is the last time you'll hear me in a state patrol car. And Jay Inslee can kiss my
It's another clash between officers and states, coming as coronavirus is the leading cause of death for officers nationwide, more than firearms and traffic-related deaths combined, according to the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund. In Chicago, a city plagued by gun violence and coming off of a violent summer, the head of the city's largest police union urging officers to stay the course.
Hold the line, keep fighting.
Despite a restraining order barring him from telling officers not to comply with the city's vaccine mandate. It's a mandate that's sparking dueling lawsuits between the city and the local Fraternal Order of Police.
We believe that the FOP leadership is trying to foment an illegal work stoppage.
In Massachusetts, union officials estimate 150 state police officers have resigned ahead of a state vaccination mandate that takes effect today. And in Baltimore, the city's police union is urging officers not to comply with a similar mandate until a bargaining agreement is reached with the city. It comes as those who have gotten the vaccine still facing questions over booster shots, an FDA advisory panel voting unanimously to recommend boosters for 15 million Americans who received the one-shot J&J vaccine, though Dr. Anthony Fauci now says it should have been a 2-dose vaccine to begin with. Still under consideration is whether J&J recipients will be able to safely receive Moderna or Pfizer boosters.
Make some cocktail sauce.
Here in Chicago, it's still unknown as to how many police officers defied the mayor's orders, but we do know that city officials are combing through all that information. We should know more in the coming days. Meanwhile, in Seattle, we reached out to Washington State's governor for a comment on that viral trooper video. But Hoda, we are still waiting back.
All right, Megan Fitzgerald Force there.
Governor Jay Inslee, how do you feel about that guy telling you to kiss his ass? Like, he's not going to fucking respond.
Why would I say anything
but
about
dude,
that?
They bring up a huge point because Chicago police obviously are trying to strike and fight against this and stuff. But crime in Chicago has been skyrocketing over the summer. Like they said that a bloody summer. Like Chicago is having a lot of crime. And then now you're about to lose
1980s numbers crime.
Right. And now you're about to lose half your police or a majority of your a chunk of your police force. I don't know how many people. They said 150 members, so I don't know how big
it's
of
enough
that
to
is.
feel it.
But you're gonna feel it though, and that's my point. Is like I don't know if this is like it's cool like in the long run, but in the short run, when you run out of police and nurses and finance guys and retail workers and everybody's at home just playing on YouTube. Like,
see, this is the thing. A general strike sounds awesome in concept. But then when it's like day 5 of the general strike and you can't go to the grocery store because there's nobody working there
And
and you
there's
can't get any
martial law.
food. Yeah, like that's when general strike starts feeling like, oh man, did we do the right thing? Like maybe I should have just taken the $10.
When I rented the movie RoboCop in the 1980s,
I just watched it last night.
We're living through
Cops don't
RoboCop.
strike.
This is RoboCop.
It's RoboCop. We're literally living it right now.
Look for Boston Dynamics Atlas robot on the street soon.
Judge Dredd coming in 2030.
Yeah, 100%.
You're not gonna want that.
But over these fucking vaccines, I just think that is it's just bad timing, man. Like you said, like this COVID situation is getting a little out of hand, not because of the death of COVID though, but just all these ramifications of everything that they're trying to do to like maintain that little, it's like we talk about all the time. They're trying to hold all this pressure in, and they're just like trying to keep their hand. This is popping out over here, popping out in unemployment.
I keep thinking about it too because like, I got vaccinated, but you guys didn't. And I didn't necessarily want to get vaccinated. I probably wouldn't have unless, I had to interact with some old people. Yeah. So I was like, fine, I'll do it. But my point is, if you chose not to get the vaccine and then you got COVID and you beat it, you got the antibodies. Mm-hmm. Okay? Now they want you vaccinated too. Yeah. And like, they just keep moving the goalposts.
Those aren't the good antibodies.
They keep moving the goalposts. The goalpost is like, just stay inside for a little bit. And then goalpost is like, well, maybe herd immunity. And now they're like, vaccination.
100%. He said the J&J vaccine shouldn't have been a one-shot vaccine, but you let it roll anyways. You encouraged everybody to get it, and then now you're going to be like, it shouldn't. And then we're supposed to have faith in it, right? Here's the other thing. Remember I told you about Colin Powell, right? Mm-hmm. Died from COVID-19 complications, right? Mm-hmm. Fully vaccinated. Yep. So I'm just like...
Yeah. I mean, he was like 80-something, though,
He was 84, and I mean, of course...
Have you guys heard about this whole thing? Jimmy Dore was doing this whole story about how it's come out that a lot of people have been getting the vaccine wrong. Like injected. What you're supposed to do is you're supposed to take the vaccine and inject it in put the syringe in the arm, but it's like an intermuscular vaccine. It doesn't go in your bloodstream. Right. So then they're supposed to pull back a little bit to make sure that they're not in a blood vessel or in a vein.
You're supposed to pull the blood.
You're supposed to pull it out to make sure. I've never seen anything like when they do it to Joe Biden, when they do it to anybody on TV, any videos I've seen of it, they just put it in and put it in. And now they're finding out in Israel, they just said that men under the age of 24 shouldn't get the Moderna vaccine because of increased risk of heart inflammation called myocarditis. And I'm thinking like, dude, are they injecting this stuff into people's blood and then it's getting into their heart and causing myocarditis?
Maybe.
Because they've been doing it wrong?
Maybe.
And I'm like, and you still want me to go get it? I mean, but after all of this,
it's true. But not to make it a COVID a vaccine conversation because we had that tons of times. But still, mandates specifically, like you said, firing 80,000 of your healthcare employees just to pull it. This is not the time. It's just not the time. You're already at a staff shortage, and that's the type of shit that I think is just like it feels frivolous to me. It feels like that's not a good solution. Like it might be a solution to your COVID problem, but there's a lot of other problems arising in society from this whole thing, and I think you got to balance those out.
Great point. Tying all of the other problems in our economic and workforce society to vaccine mandates is a bad idea. We've already got low wages. Yeah. We've already got record profits for the 1%. Like
people who don't want to work. And
like you were saying, general strike's not going to look like fucking people celebrate good times. Come on, they're going to be marching down the street, going to the fucking Capitol building and like celebrating. This is going to be riots. This is going to be no police on the street, massive crime, people LARPing in fucking military gear everywhere. It's going to be a shit show.
It's going to be a shit show. Man, this presidency is just not working out very well.
The last fucking 4 years haven't really been working out too well for anybody. I mean, it's we've kind of seen a downturn.
This one's got some Jimmy Carter shades to it. Like I'm seeing a similar image coming, you know what I mean? Gas shortages, employment shortages, terrible foreign policy,
hyperinflation.
I mean,
people turning to criminality.
It's real Jimmy Carter-y right now.
And I'm not going to put it all on Biden because, like you said, it didn't just start there.
Yeah,
it didn't start there.
This has all been happening.
Yeah,
really, it's like every president for the last 50 years has been like kicking the can down the road, and Joe Biden ended up picking up the can and was like, what's this? What's in this can? Opens up the shit, it's a grenade. The death of my political career.
Because I mean, even back to like Clinton opened up the trade to where it was NAFTA. We could start having these giant warehouses in China making our goods, and giant factories in other places where they'd work for cheaper. And it's like, was that a good idea?
Yeah, I don't know.
The housing bill too. Clinton did the housing bill too, and he skirted both of those. He was like, "Oh yeah," he made sure to do things that wouldn't explode until he was done with his term.
Yeah. Same thing with like with criminal stuff. Like when we were talking about rates increasing, debt and decreasing home ownership. One of the ones I thought about was the increase in incarceration.
Yep,
that's
huge
another one.
That's
the
crime bill
going right up through the roof, and it's like. That can't be a good none of these are good signs.
It's like I see why people are always predicting the end times. I struggle with it often. I'm like, we're living in the end times. And I'm like, they probably said that when they were going through the Great Depression and World War II. But to be I feel like as a millennial, we had it a pretty easy ride, and now we're starting to see that when it turns against you and society's not all as
every generation has their massive world thing that happens to them, and you never think it's gonna be you until it happens.
I thought it was just 9/11, but it turns out it's COVID-19.
That was just the tip of the iceberg. That was just the cherry on top of the sundae.
Yeah, we're starting to live through
this
it.
This is so funny. I got a quick story for you. Girlfriend opens the cabinet, sees the pork and beans. She's like, how do you eat pork and beans? Like, what are you gonna ever eat these? Like, you put them in a bowl or something? I was like, oh no, I when COVID hit in March of 2020, I bought a cooler and filled it full of dry goods. Just in case.
Yep. You don't eat the pork and beans until you have to eat the pork and beans, and then you eat them cold from the can, of course.
We've already sold our last bowl if we're eating the pork and beans.
I went to the grocery store, which by the way was empty. Empty. And I had my cooler with wheels on it, and I was wheeling it around, and they knew me because this is a grocery store I used to work in. It was as soon as I got back home, I went to my old store and I packed up, and I'm getting the cheapest, longest lasting dry goods I can find, and pork and beans just happen to be 69 cents a can.
It's number 3 on the list.
I wasn't going to pay $1.09 for SpaghettiOs or something that only lasts 2 years. Yeah. I'm getting the fucking pork and beans, and I'm getting the store brand.
Yep.
Oh yeah, and so it was just funny that I had never in my life ever thought to prepare in that way for anything ever. I've been through power outages. I've been through mass casualty events. I've never bought a fucking cooler full of dry goods and stuck it in my car until 2020.
Dude. It's kind of my dream that we'll fuck it up in this way, honestly. Just to show, as somebody who has a healthy distrust for the government, and everybody thinks that I'm crazy for it, I can't, I hope, okay, I don't hope, but
it'd be funny to watch it all blow up in their faces.
Because it's them. To find out that it's not coronavirus that wipes us out, it's them trying to contain coronavirus that fucks us completely.
How far does that go, though? Are we talking about a complete collapse of all society to where we...
I don't want to see that, no, but...
Are we returning to monkey? To monkey.
I mean, we might. I just... Like I said, the social pressures, you feel them so much. And it's not just the government's fault, right? We talk about social media is not helping. The fact that just all these situations, but it's hard to say, but it feels like it's coming to a head. It feels like all these situations, like you said, employment wages and all that shit, and everything that has been a problem is now starting to kind of come to the surface, and it's getting harder for them to just keep kicking that. The can's getting fucking heavy. Now it's trying to kick a fucking boulder, and they're stubbing their toe on it, and it's gonna be ugly because. We talked about a lot of things on this podcast that let hyperinflation actually come out to be a thing. And now nobody's working. And then hyperinflation kicks off. And then now they can't afford to hire the workers back. And then
and then pour in a pandemic. Let's go ahead and pour in some climate change.
You know what I mean?
Pour in some racist problems.
If that all really comes to a head, we could be looking at, the fall of, the greatest nation the world's ever seen, which happens. It happens. People act like it won't happen to them, but it happens.
Well, in an effort to maybe tamp down some of your negative outlook on the future, let me show you this video of a KGB defector talking about subversion. This is going to make you feel great.
It's so funny because my immediate thought was, I bet you in the USSR, they weren't thinking about the collapse of their society and balkanization of their states. They weren't thinking that, Kazakhstan should be its own thing.
Yeah.
You know who else should be their own thing? Uzbekistan.
Yeah, they weren't.
And Czechoslovakia. Like, no, they were like, you are Russia.
Yeah.
You are Soviet state.
I guess, we might give that other half of Berlin back to Germany.
Yeah. And I really do see, like, if I had to put $20 on what I think would happen in the downfall of American society, I would say a breaking up of the United States and a balkanization of certain areas.
I could see that.
I'm actually rooting for that. It's something that's now becoming part of the zeitgeist, which is national divorce. And actually, Michael Malice has been the guy that I've been listening talk about it the most. And the way he describes it is actually very interesting because people have all these, like you say, national divorce. And a lot of people just picture like the Civil War, like Gettysburg and stuff. And he was like, not every divorce ends with the husband murdering the wife. That's true. Or whatever.
That's
like sometimes
true.
you just have a divorce and it's like, hey,
we're going
didn't work out.
I'm going to move to Iowa. You stay here.
And so like that idea of like how you break it up and who gets what and everything, obviously that would be an extremely complicated thing, just like any divorce. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we're all going to go down in flames. Like we might just break back off. Like it'll be like the Louisiana Territory. We'll be back to the Louisiana Territory
I'll tell
or whatever
you this,
the fuck.
though, I've seen a lot more messy divorces than I've seen amicable.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's going to be a clean divorce, but it doesn't also have to be Gettysburg.
Also, based off of your
in between,
based off of your foreign influence talk that we're about to have, how long before Russia comes in and is like, "Hey, Louisiana property, you look like you need a little money and some influence."
Well, okay, so he actually talks about this. This is a really interesting point that people bring up, and I hadn't thought about it. And I was like, yeah, I mean, if we all break up, we're a lot easier to be invaded or whatever. But then he's like, how come nobody's invaded Canada?
Oh, I'm not talking about invasion. I'm talking about subversion and control.
Well, they don't have to. You don't have to be small to do that.
Yeah, that might be happening.
As Yuri Bezmenov will just explain, you can subvert even the largest nation.
I couldn't help but laugh when you introduced this video, though, too, because when I watched it, I left with a heavy spirit. I was like, oh, no.
Yeah, I mean, he's not going to give you any good news.
Oh, no.
So, okay, this man's name is Yuri Bezmenov, and he is a KGB. He used to work for this newspaper, some sort of press outlet that was run by the KGB. So he's like a KGB propaganda guy. And he defected to America, I think in like the early 70s. And he started lecturing and giving courses and stuff at universities about subversion. And he'll say it in the video, but he talks about how we have this idea of like spy espionage shit that was going on during the Cold War or whatever, James Bond type stuff. And he says that from his experience and other people that he's talked to that have defected, it's about 85% or 15% of like the KGB's money and activity goes to espionage type stuff. It's actually more psychological warfare type stuff, which he calls subversion. And he did this interview where he talks about it and he kind of breaks down how it goes and what we might be able to do to like mitigate the process. Because it's already like, he's talking in 1984 in this video and it's already been in process. So, it's progressed since then.
Well, you spoke several times before about ideological subversion. That is a phrase that...
I've seen it once before, but I didn't rewatch it for the podcast.
When the Soviets used the phrase ideological subversion, what do they mean by it?
Ideological subversion is the process which is legitimate, overt, and open. You can see it with your own eyes. All you have to do, all American mass media has to do, is to unplug their bananas from their ears, open up their eyes, and they can see it. There is no mystery. There is nothing to do with espionage. I know that espionage intelligence gathering looks more romantic. It sells more deodorants through the advertising, probably. That's why your Hollywood producers are so crazy about James Bond type of thrillers. But in reality, the main emphasis of the KGB is not in the area of intelligence at all. According to my opinion and opinion of many defectors of my caliber, only about 15% of time, money, and manpower is spent on espionage as such. The other 85% is a slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in 4 basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism. The result you can see, most of the people who graduated in the 60s, dropouts or half-baked intellectuals, are now occupying the positions of power in the government, civil service, business, mass media, educational system. You are stuck with them. You cannot get rid of them. They are contaminated. They are programmed to think and react to certain stimuli in a certain pattern. You cannot change their mind, even if you expose them to authentic information, even if you prove that white is white and black is black, you still cannot change the basic perception and the logic of behavior. In other words, these people, the process of demoralization is complete and irreversible. To get rid society of these people, you need another 20 or 15 years to educate a new generation of patriotically minded and common sense people who would be acting in favor and in the interests of United States society.
And yet these people who've been programmed and, as you say, in place and who are favorable to an opening with the Soviet concept, these are the very people who would be marked for extermination in this country?
Most of them, yes. Simply because the psychological shock when they will see in future what the beautiful society of equality and social justice means in practice, obviously they will revolt. They will be very unhappy, frustrated people. And the Marxist-Leninist regime does not tolerate these people. Obviously they will join the links of dissenters, dissidents. Unlike in present United States, there will be no place for dissent in future Marxist-Leninist America. Here you can get popular like Daniel Ellsberg and filthy rich like Jane Fonda for being dissident, for criticizing your Pentagon. In future, these people will be simply squashed like cockroaches. Nobody is going to pay them nothing for their beautiful, noble ideas of equality. This they don't understand, and it will be greatest shock for them, of course. The demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. For the last 25 years. Actually, it's overfulfilled because demoralization now reaches such areas where previously not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he is going to receive a kick in his fat bottom. When a military boot crashes then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragic of the situation of demoralization. So basically America is stuck with demoralization, and unless, even if you start right now, here, this minute, you start educating new generation of Americans, it will still take you 15 to 20 years to turn the tide of ideological perception of reality back to normalcy and patriotism. The next stage is destabilization. This time, subverter does not care about your ideas and the patterns of your consumption. Whether you eat junk food and get fat and flabby, it doesn't matter anymore. This time, and it takes only from 2 to 5 years to destabilize a nation, what matters is essentials: economy, foreign relations, defense systems. And you can see it quite clearly that in some areas, in such sensitive areas as defense and economy, the influence of Marxist-Leninist ideas in the United States is absolutely fantastic. I could never believe it 14 years ago when I landed in this part of the world that the process will go that fast. The next stage, of course, is crisis. It may take only up to 6 weeks to bring a country to the verge of crisis. You can see it in Central America now. And after crisis, with a violent change of power, structure, and economy, you have so-called the period of normalization. It may last indefinitely. Normalization is a cynical expression borrowed from Soviet propaganda. When the Soviet tanks moved into Czechoslovakia in '68, Comrade Brezhnev said, "Now the situation in brotherly Czechoslovakia is normalized." This is what will happen in the United States if you allow all these schmucks to bring the country to crisis, to promise people all kind of goodies and the paradise on earth, to destabilize your economy, to eliminate the principle of free market competition, and to put a big brother government in Washington, D.C., with benevolent dictators like Walter Mondale, who will promise lots of things, never mind whether the promises are fulfillable or not. He will go to Moscow to kiss the bottoms of new generation of Soviet assassins. Never mind. He will create false illusions that the situation is under control. Situation is not under control. Situation is disgustingly out of control. Most of the American politicians, media, and educational system trains another generation of people who think they are living at a peacetime. False. The United States is in the state of war, undeclared total war against the basic principles and the foundations of this system. And the initiator of this war is not Comrade Andropov, of course. It's the system. However ridiculous it may sound, the world communist system or the world communist conspiracy, whether I scare some people or not, I don't give a hoot. If you are not scared by now, nothing can scare you. But you don't have to be paranoid about it. What actually happens now, that unlike myself, you have literally several years to live on unless the United States wake up. The time bomb is ticking. With every second, the disaster is coming closer and closer. Unlike myself, you will have nowhere to defect to, unless you want to live in Antarctica with penguins. This is it. This is the last country of freedom and possibility.
Okay, so what do we do? What is your recommendation to the American people?
Well, the immediate thing that comes to my mind is, of course, there must be a very strong national effort to educate people in the spirit of real patriotism, number one. Number two, to explain them the real danger of socialist, communist, whatever, welfare state, big brother government. If people will fail to grasp the impending danger of that development, nothing ever can help United States. You may kiss goodbye to your freedom, including freedoms to homosexuals, to prison inmate. All this freedom will vanish, evaporate in 5 seconds, including your precious lives. The second thing...
So yeah.
It's pretty dark.
Yeah. Hence the sarcasm when I brought it up.
Yeah.
I was just, I just kind of stumbled across this randomly. Like it was just in my YouTube suggested things. And I thought it was fascinating. Like I obviously don't necessarily agree with everything he said there, but that the process of subversion that he described and the outcomes that he described and like how the timeline works, it just got me thinking, like, as I look back on what's transpired since I've been alive, like I almost feel like it's kind of a stretch still at this point, but I almost feel like you can
I already feel demoralized.
Fit the pieces into the puzzle, along the timeline. You're like, oh, I see what's happening
right
here. Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, like, and then with the pandemic happening, like, that's a perfect opportunity to be like, well, this is the crisis.
Execute Order 66.
We joked earlier, or I joked earlier about September 11th. Like, I thought that was supposed to be the big thing. Fits his timeline. I mean, if your ultimate goal is to go all over the world and control the oil and control people and then come back home and control the people within your own country and everything like that, I mean, you might fly 2 planes into 2 buildings and,
It's right on cue.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like, and he said it's right out in front of you. You know what I mean? Like he said, it's not espionage, it's subversion. It's like, it's happening right in front of your eyes.
Yeah.
2 planes hit those buildings. Now, were they Saudi pilots acting on the behest of Osama bin Laden? Maybe. Was there someone else behind that tragic event that could have maybe not just moved the pawn and moved the pieces as things happened, but actually set those moves in motion, knowing what their next few moves were going to be? Who's to say? It seems very suspicious.
That's the thing that reached out to me the most when I watched this video, was like, I feel that now. Like, I feel like it's hard for me to find the truth, to know. It doesn't matter. Like we talk about facts, like facts don't matter to me anymore. Like I can see all the facts and graphs in the world, and I always feel like I have to question that, or if that's actually real or not real, or is that somebody skewed person. But like that whole part, particularly when he was talking about demoralization and stuff, like, I feel like it already as Americans, it's hard for us to unite on any type of topic or any type of anything. Like we can't really come to grips with it because, like you said, you just never really know. You just don't know what the truth is anymore. And that is a scary place to be.
Well, you question everything for a reason, because I know when I joined the military, I didn't think it was to go do some fuck shit that didn't matter to the world and was just advancing private interests. I never thought that. I thought it was doing it for what we're supposed to do. It's the good thing to do. We're the good guys. And then you get over there and you're like, holy shit, are we in the Cobra Clan?
Yeah.
Like I thought we were Foot. I thought we were the Bonsai Dojo. No, it turns out we're in the Foot Clan.
Yeah, 100%.
And the interesting thing to me about it is, I guess you could say, like, culturally, this country really started to shift like late 50s, early 60s. I guess it didn't start then, but that's when it started to have actual physical outcomes in policy, in social dynamics, in economics and stuff like that. And I mean, that would be like right on cue. I mean, World War II ended 1945, 1947. So like late 40s into the early 50s, you got massive waves of patriotism and stuff like that. And then through those 5 to 10 years, the Soviet Union bolsters up their subversion program or whatever. And then you start seeing it in the next decade, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Not to say like, and I think that the part that I disagree the most with in that video and his views is just like, I don't think that everything that comes from the culture of your enemy, like not all the ideas of Soviet Russia were bad, and so it's just about how you implement them and how you can work them into your own society and things like that. So I don't think that, I don't agree that we should be like raising up a new generation of like super patriotic people. I think that we should raise up a generation of people who look critically at all nations, including their own. And that includes looking at it critically in the sense of like criticizing it, but also looking at it critically in the sense of comparing it to everything else, and I have this saying which is kind of my beliefs on like the American exceptionalism idea, which is that there's a big difference between living in the freest society on earth and living in a free society, full stop. And so, but I think that based on the description that he gave, I can't see any, like, nobody else has given a theory for why the culture shifted so drastically in the 20th century. You know what I mean? Like, this is the first guy that I've ever heard come out and be like, this is what happened. The Soviet Union was subverting your ideologies and your entire American philosophy. And that led to some really good things, but I think that now people are starting to think like maybe it also led to some bad things.
And it continues to shift. It continues to be pushed. And the things that he mentioned specifically about communism, we've definitely seen that pushed since the McCarthy era, all the way up to current times, to where now, like, I had never, growing up and being through middle school, high school, doing some college, I had never throughout that time met a communist person.
Mm-hmm.
They're
everywhere now.
Now they're fucking everywhere.
Yeah.
I know like 3 communists.
There's like actual communists in elected positions in our government.
Yeah.
Like about communists.
And that's just pointing to like one of many different subverted ideologies that are being pushed. You know, one of the things that I think you mentioned too was like, okay, if you were to subvert America and you wanted to make us less moral or less ethical, you would, and less devoted to the state and more open to the ideas of communism and socialist welfare states, you would take the Pledge of Allegiance out of school.
Right.
You
would not have the Star Spangled Banner at ball games.
You would not have people praying openly.
Yeah.
Like you would do these type of things.
It has to also be unchallenged by the American patriotic view,
right?
Which we've seen a drastic change in that.
Yep.
Like, you know.
And one thing that you mentioned, which was really interesting, you were talking about how, you know, the culture continues to shift. It continues to move in those directions. And I watched a much longer, it was like an hour-long lecture that he did a couple of years before this interview at a university. I think it was somewhere in Los Angeles. I can't remember what the actual school was. But he went more in depth in this. It was like a much longer breakdown of these ideas. And he talked about how the first human being to come up with the ideas of subversion was actually Sun Tzu. And his conclusions that he came to after meditation that he ended up writing down in The Art of War, which is basically that the highest art of warfare is to not have to fight your enemy at all. And he talked about how the least effective way to impose your state ideology on another state would be to meet that state on a battlefield and fight it out
and force it
upon them, you know, and conquering their people and stuff like that. He was like, the best way to do it is to make them look at your system as an alternative or possibly desirable to what they already have. But the first step is just making it visible to them. Like, hey, this is another way that you could do that. And he also talked about how, and this is like a further breakdown of how the Russians look to Eastern cultures to develop their program. And he talked about how in like the Chinese and Japanese art of judo, in the martial art, you don't try to take on another attacker's direct strike. You don't try to stop their blow. You avoid the blow and then use their momentum and you pull them further in the direction that they were already going. And so he was talking, and that kind of lends to what you mentioned about how we continue to move along these trends. And it's like, yeah, you allow them to take the first step by showing it to them. And then once they take that step, you continue to pull them along that road. And I thought that was interesting that you picked that up because that was something that he described in depth.
It's like manufacturing consent.
Exactly.
How would you go about educating our population, though? That's the one thing that I thought was kind of like, I mean, did Russia plant a bunch of people in our education system that were like pushing
I think
communist Marxism? Like, how do you get that propaganda or that kind of like subversion into the zeitgeist
over a very, very long time and very small increments?
Yeah.
Yes.
How do you get America to have a lower birth rate? Well, you flood them with porn. You know,
birth control,
like
contraception.
It goes on and on and on and on.
All these things that slowly equate to the outcome at the end,
which is having less children.
I think that I mean, I think that it's true that the KGB probably planted people here. Like, we had people there. We have people all over the place now. So that's not out of the realm of possibility. But I think it's more so along the lines of, like he described in that longer lecture, he was talking about, first you make it just visible to them. You just expose them to your society and your culture, and you show them that this is something else that's happening. And that's like the first step. And then you get them to accept it like that is an alternative. That's something that we could look at. And then over time it becomes desirable. But I think, you only have to look at, a lot of people in the 40s, 50s, and 60s went to the Soviet Union after World War II to see how this new powerhouse was operating. Lots of intellectuals went and studied there. They tried to learn the culture and the economics of the Soviet Union, and they brought those ideas back. And then they took up positions in academics, in government, and you just slowly share these views with other people, and it just starts to kind of catch on organically, I think, is the most. In the same way that word of mouth organic advertising is still the most effective. But
didn't we follow up World War II with the Cold War?
It was followed by the Korean War, the American-Philippine War.
Well, he's just talking about in context with the Soviet Union. And yes, it was a Cold War, but that doesn't necessarily mean that
anti-communist sentiment, so
yeah,
that's where I'm trying to I don't see you in 1950 being able to openly, I'm going to go to the USSR to study communism.
No, it was very controversial at the time.
Yeah.
But I mean, then again, as you can see though, over time with more exposure, I'm not saying it's causational, but there's a strong correlation with extended exposure and more acceptability to it. And so even though it was super controversial back then, Bernie Sanders had his honeymoon in the Soviet Union. I mean, that's just a widely known thing. And it really wasn't that controversial when he did it because it wasn't super duper long. It wasn't like in McCarthy era type times. But I mean, this is something that has been happening over and over, or more and more as time has progressed. So even though homosexuality used to be a really big taboo, it's not really at all anymore.
Yeah.
And so I think that communism and stuff, it used to be better dead than red. But, people kind of switched to see America's not really doing us any favors. Maybe it's better red than dead.
It was a year ago, I remember Fox News talking about how, Putin's a manly man. We like a tough guy,
Yeah.
And I was thinking in my head, we've come so far in this subversion that we have our right-wing conservative Republicans touting Putin's tactics.
Yeah.
What?
And him and Trump were buddy, dude.
There was a lot of buddy shit. I went and looked at the people who were indicted during the Mueller investigation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, recently, people like not Chuck Schumer. It might be Chuck Schumer, but some of these guys. Adam Schiff.
Mm-hmm.
Adam Schiff said recently that if he had known how Mueller was going to handle the investigation and how Mueller's political ideology potentially had shifted from the old Mueller, because he was an old man who'd been in politics for a long time, he would not have push for him to be the special counsel. That would not. He didn't like that decision in retrospect. Based on just that Mueller investigation, if you take that and say, well, he also wasn't going to ever charge the president because of that internal memo from the Department of Justice that says president can't commit crimes. He still indicted a couple of Russians.
Yeah.
He got some people. They put Maria Butina in jail for 18 months and deported her ass because just for unregistered agent of Russia. When her whole shtick was, I'm going to infiltrate the NRA. I'm going to start fucking some old white guys and I'm going to have them pushing our agenda.
Yeah.
And then you got Konstantin Kalimnik and you got the oligarchs and you've got the sharing of internal polling. You got Michael Flynn accepting all this money from Turkey and from Russia under the table and not declaring it and then getting literally appointed into a position of power. And then he had to go and be like, okay, yeah, I guess Turkey was literally paying me, but, it's no big deal, guys, I swear.
It didn't affect me in any way.
Me in any way. They just gave me millions of dollars. You got Paul Manafort, millions of dollars in the Ukraine. even with that investigation being a shit show and not showing us what people thought it was going to show us. Everybody thought it was going to show us Trump peeing on hookers, dapping up Putin, exchanging fucking favors. That's not what it was ever going to show us. What it was going to show us was Russian subversion has been here a very long time, and it's deeply entrenched into every political party.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard it in the education system. I mean, I'm mostly quoting Jordan Peterson and saying that he's seen a lot of communist ideology coming out of the academic community.
Of course, yeah.
And
that's
would,
stage one. How do you
notice that
them?
too? That like the academic community tends to be far more left leaning than they are like American patriotism or whatever. So
and that's been true for a very long time too. That's not like a new thing. That people in education are much more open to left-leaning ideologies in the same way that people that are entrenched in the military are much more right-leaning ideologies. Like it's just like a subculture, really.
Because there was a clear schism that happened in the 60s, right? Like, like you said, like there was like a clear mark of like, all right, we're off this
we're doing something
American
different now.
patriotism bullshit. Like we all kind of work and think the same way type shit. Like there was a very clear like separation that happened between like America's like left and America's right. And then we've seen that extrapolate all the way to today where it's like all out fucking fist fight between the two.
And they also, there's like a lack of critical thinking. I like to think about like, okay, you've got like the back the blue people. That's their tribe, right? Is they're going to have the little flag with the blue stripe in it. They're going to back the police. And then you see a video of a cop kill a guy. And you're like, heesh, that doesn't look too good, but I back the blue.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm locked in.
I'm locked in.
I'm locked in. So you can be showing them the facts.
Right,
showing them the facts. Hey, man, like these cops are corrupt as fuck. You got those cops
government lapdogs.
Yeah, you got those cops in North Carolina that got picked up on the cruiser was just sitting there with the radio recording by accident and caught those two cops talking about a race war and how they wanted to fucking just like cleanse black people.
Wow.
And this is
Jesus
2020.
Christ.
You know what I'm saying? Like this is
I gotta see that. That's
fucking schmucks.
Oh yeah, that's North Carolina police officers caught on audio.
Wow.
Talking about just kill their whole family.
Yeah.
You're better off.
Wow.
Like literally talking about exterminating black people. And this
They're
is
still like, hey, thin blue line, man.
Exactly. You could see that and still be like, hey, but I back the blue.
Yeah.
And
those are a couple of bad apples.
Yeah, those are just bad apples. I back the blue. The police officers are good people.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, some of them.
Yeah.
But you can't have this much fuckery. You can't have this much.
It's disproportional. I know that everybody's liking to look at the disproportionalities between groups of people, and I think that right-leaning conservative Republican people that are, back the bluers or whatever, I think that they back a disproportionately large percentage of police officers compared to just regular people in like everyday life. Like they trust a police officer much more than they would like a stranger. You know what I mean? Like when you call a police officer, there's like that level of trust that like he's going to come here and he's going to rectify the issue. Whereas you wouldn't do that for like a stranger. Like if you were being mugged, you wouldn't just like call on some random stranger, like help me. Like that guy might come over here and mug you too. Like you'd never know. But for some reason with the police, they've ingrained this idea that like, protect and serve.
Public servants.
Yeah, but that's not really how they're operating.
Right.
In the same way that like
They
the
won't
government
see
is
that,
there to
though.
like govern and keep us all on amicable terms. And it's doing the opposite. It's actually making us hate each other more and more. So it's like you guys aren't really fulfilling your duties. And so it's no surprise that we don't fuck with you anymore. And that we don't trust you. And you guys are just, you've shit on us too many times for us to be like, yeah, fucking...
Yeah,
hoorah, the government and police.
In my personal experience, it feels like police officers are less protect and serve public servants and more agents of chaos, fear, and death.
Yeah.
And that's what scares me, is I've had a lot of interactions with police, and man, they just don't have a good attitude most times. They just don't have a good attitude.
Really do not.
They walk into the situation and they're like, yep, you're a piece of shit. I already figured you out.
Mm-hmm.
How'd you already figure me out?
Yeah. There's some good
Police
ones.
instincts.
There's some good ones.
But this whole idea was just fascinating to me, and to hear it, like it's one thing to hear it from like a right-wing war hawk American dude. It's a totally different thing to hear this dude who used to work for the KGB in Soviet Union talking, and this is pre the collapse too. Like this is 5 years before the wall came down. So like this is like hardcore. I think what's his face wasn't even in power yet. The guy that Reagan was doing his stuff with,
Mikhail Gorbachev.
Yeah, he's not even the head of the shit yet. And so it's like this is when the USSR, for all intents and purposes, was like running smoothly. Everybody else thought. Obviously, there were famines happening back there, but they did a
smooth
that
bread
steel
lines.
curtain.
Yeah.
That steel curtain was really opaque. You couldn't really see through it at all. But you know, the fact that he talked about all this stuff and the way that, and like his assumed insight in the matter just totally was just like, wow, you know, like this is like more than like a theory. Like he's talking about observations that he's made. Like that's a totally different level.
The Soviet Union was like, all right, we'll get them on the ideologies. China, you get them on the product side.
I was about to say the exact same thing. I was about to say the exact same thing. That subversion from China has been there the whole time too.
They're there too.
And, you know, there's only so many superpowers in the world.
True.
Right.
India's not over here
subverting anything.
Subverting us. Okay, like the
they
Indian
could
people.
though. I mean, all the Indians in the tech industry, they could subvert the shit out of us.
Yeah,
but
well,
they seem to not really have much desire for that.
Exactly. Well, yeah, they don't exactly. There doesn't seem to be a push from the organized Indian government to subvert our morals and see us
and
fall
like
from
educate
within.
their young, bright children to be like, all right, what you're gonna do is you're gonna go over there and you're gonna embed these kill switches in their code for all of their apps.
But when it comes to Russia and China, I think you will never ever be able to find somebody in the know in our government who would ever say that China and Russia are not actively trying to subvert us at every turn.
of course.
We are at war with them.
Okay.
I think everyone agrees.
Yeah.
So I'm not picking on China or picking on Russia. They just happen to be our opponents in this culture war. And man, they're kicking our ass.
They probably are.
They're kicking our ass.
So you said they realized they couldn't fight us face to face, like up front militarily, but they were like, we play the long game on them.
China just bought all of our national debt, fed us TikTok. We love it.
You know what's so interesting too? In that longer lecture, he was even talking about how for subversion to work, it has to be a two-way street. Like the target of the subversion has to be open to subversion. And he used 19th century Japan as an example before they were forced to open up their borders by Commodore Perry. And so, you know, they had this 300-year long isolation policy where if you showed up and you weren't Japanese, they asked you to leave. And if you didn't, they just murdered you. So they were able to keep their traditions and their ideologies and their cultural standings. Like they were all intact because they weren't being infiltrated, you could say infiltrated or exposed to other ways of thinking and living. And so he talked about how there's an open communication and it seems like it's open for the other way around, but it's really not. Like it goes from Russia to America, but it can't come back from America to Russia. And he specifically was talking about how like in the Soviet Union, you know, like they have like the Times or like American magazine publications, or even I guess the American Embassy in Moscow puts out an American magazine. And he was talking about how like none of this information ever reaches a Soviet citizen because it's all collected from the newsstands in the morning and it's thrown away. So they don't let you influence their culture with yours because they cut off communication. But our culture is so open and an amalgamation of so many different people that it's susceptible to that. Like we're not going to be subverting China. China's not letting us come in with our shit. Like it's not like Huawei is a Chinese cell phone company that's trying to infiltrate the American cell phone market. But China makes all of the other phones that America also produces. You know what I mean? Like Samsung. Well, Samsung's not Chinese. It's Korean?
I think it's
Korean, yeah. So like, you know, you got Samsung, you got Apple, which is all, you know, it's an American company, but it's all made in China. And so it's like
I heard that they like make video games like for us, but they won't let theirs.
No, they won't like our movies and stuff. Like they only let certain movies over into China.
This thing, right? I was reading on the back of the packaging the other day, and it said "Designed in the USA, made in China, only for sale in the United States." So like you can't buy this in China.
Yeah.
Like the Chinese are like, no, that shit'll fucking kill us, dog. Like,
we'll make it for you.
Yeah, we'll make it for you, but
not
you
for
won't.
us.
Yeah.
And that is interesting that you said like we are very susceptible while not being able to promote that. But like he said, even worse, we don't really promote American ideologies in the first place here. Like there's no such thing as that anymore to a millennial. Like I know I don't have any of that.
Our ideology is now just the culture. It's eat hot chip, dance in front of screen.
Yeah.
Like that's that's our ideology if you're a 12-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
And you can homeschool, maybe, you can try, you can do certain things to shield the future generations from the culture, but the culture's happening whether we like it or not.
Saw how many people were willing to just shit on the flag or like burn it or throw it in, you know what I mean? Like
there was all those like Ring doorbell videos that were being uploaded on 9/11. Like I watched this one where like a woman, she was a heavy set white woman. That doesn't really matter, but I wanted to add it in there. But she was walking with her son and they were like walking down the street and there were like American flags in the like lining the sidewalk on the lawn, and the kid was like picking them up and throwing them and kicking them, and then the mom came over and they like picked one up together. It was like they were picking flowers in a field. Like it was like this beautiful moment between this mother and son shitting on American symbolism. And like I can understand, like, obviously the right conservatives were like, no, this is blasphemy, and I was like, like I don't really like it either, but like I have no reverence for the flag as a symbol, nor do I have any desire to like oppress it.
Here's a great idea.
You're not gonna catch me like waving an American flag around, but you're also not gonna catch me burning one.
Here's a great idea. Why don't we come together as an American society and design a flag that we all like?
Good luck.
Yeah, I don't think we were trying to do that with the government, and as we've already learned with the flag is your government, so you're not gonna do that.
It's just like, we've seen it happen with states that have Confederate flags within their flag. They've changed. Okay. If the American flag is
never gonna happen,
so bad.
But that's the thing, though, is like you're looking at it like it's not that they have artistic design, things that they think. It's a representation. The flag is a symbol for the country,
but damn,
and they don't agree with that country's systems and policies and the way that it's operating, so they attack the flag. It's a symbolic gesture. So it's not the flag itself. The flag could look like anything else, but if the country's the same, then people would do the same thing.
Do you like the flag?
Like the way it's designed?
Like when when you see the flag, what kind of emotions arise for you?
I look at it as I look at all archaic things from hundreds of years ago. It could be different. Doesn't it? Why does it have to be a flag? Can it just not be an image? Can it be an NFT? Like, why does it have to? Can it be a GIF? Can our flag be a GIF? No. I'm asking the tough questions.
But what would it be a GIF of, though? Like, are you just talking about a GIF of a flag?
It's just a GIF
same?
of, like, George Costanza, like, opening the door and waggling his eyebrows or something. Who knows?
I mean, that's a flag I can get behind.
You see what I'm saying?
The flag.
But, for me, I don't have any sort of feelings like when I see a flag. Like you're driving down the road, some car dealership's got this big old American flag, and some people are like, yeah, that's right, America. But like I just drive right by it. It's like a billboard. I'm just like, ignore.
That's just advertising for our government.
Because like when I went to go pick up the car with moms, we pulled up the CarMax and they had the
car dealership's got the biggest flags, dude.
Flag, man, it was huge.
In my hometown is Randy Marion. Randy Marion Chevrolet had the biggest flag in the state.
It flying, and I remember thinking like, that's kind of ugly. Like, you know what I mean? Like I remember thinking like I did not get that feeling of like, yeah, fuck yeah. I got that feeling of just like not like disgust or hate or anything like that, but you're just like, that's a bad look. Yeah, it felt like a bad look. Exactly. Like I saw it and I just thought like, that's tacky.
I just pictured the old white woman like sewing it for the first time on the porch and being like, hey, slave, go get me a cold iced tea. I'm parched.
That's funny. That's demoralization as he's speaking of it right there in my face, like in my own psyche, because that did used to stand for something. People used to be proud of that flag, and it meant something to people. But now, as we're sitting here talking about it, like it doesn't really do that for people anymore.
Well,
if anything, sometimes people are embarrassed by it, or they're like, think of it as like audacious. Like you automatically start thinking very like right wing type ideology or something. But the point is not that what it makes you feel but it doesn't make you feel patriotic, and it doesn't make you feel. Some people it does, right? But that could be that subversion at work,
Well, yeah, point. That's exactly. It could be the result of subversion. It's hard to say whether or not it is because it's like a secret act. But I think that you kind of touched on it in the sense that the reason why, like, there's still a lot of people that really fuck with the flag because they really fuck with the country still. Sure. And so I think that it's, as any symbol, it has context behind it, but everybody's context is different. So like some people see the symbol and it symbolizes a lot of really evil things. And so they shit on it and burn it. And some people see it and it doesn't reflect kindly, but it's also not really like a point of contention for them. That would be like where you fall into. And then there's some people that are like, hoorah, the flag, and like they enjoy whatever it is that they see behind it.
But I would say that those numbers are skewing, right? Like I think
they're dropping like
if you had shown it in 1955, what do you think about this? It would have been like freedom, patriotism, fucking American ideology and values, right? And then now fast forward, you're gonna get some of that, but then you're gonna get a lot of other people being like
colonization.
It's fucking imperial patriarchy and it's this and that, and that could be that subversion at work where the values of America and the patriotism and like he's saying all those things, the ideologies that built the country, that keep the country united, are eroding away to a point where people now, like there's a strong, like you said, it would have been hard pressed in the 50s to find somebody who thought disgust when they saw the flag.
Yeah.
Now if I were to do a poll, I guarantee you'd be like in the 20 to 30 percentile of people who are like, oh, that's fucking body.
I think part of it too is we have kind of tied patriotism to nationalism.
Yeah.
Patriotism is like watching the Olympics and rooting for your country. But if another country wins, you're like, good sport. Yep. Good job. Nationalism is like
America to death.
We're going to steal their shoes before the race.
No, it's like sacking and raping the Olympic village. It's literally like, it's like nationalism is I am the best to everyone else's detriment. Mm-hmm. Patriotism is I look at what we're doing and I'm proud of it.
Yeah.
And I think that instead of divorcing those things, we have instead kind of been told that it's all one thing.
Did we do that or did Russia do
that? Well, that's kind of the point I'm getting at is why did it all become one thing?
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of all became one thing because we have put our identities online to tie ourselves into all these tribes. Mm-hmm. So before, if I was pro-police, but I didn't go around telling everybody I'm pro-police and flying a fucking thin blue line flag and making it the fucking the frame of my Facebook picture, you know what I'm saying? I could have just seen some cop doing some fuck shit and been like, fucking cops, man, out here doing that bad shit. Nasty motherfucker. I can't believe you out here killing people, fucking cops. But now it's like, back the blue. Because I've established in my online personal identity and my cultural avatar that I am the guy who backs the blue. Mm-hmm. So if I'm the guy who loves America, that anytime America does something, and I have to be the guy that still loves America, no matter what, instead of being like, man, America could sure use a cleanup. Mm-hmm. We could really change some things and be better, but it's all absolutes now.
Well, that's the dangerous thing about it. I said, as I watched this too, and I thought the inverse of it, I was like, what if this is the inversion at work, right? Because I guess my point being is like, I don't remember what I was gonna say.
Communism good.
Right.
Right. Well, exactly.
Yeah, I don't know what I was gonna.
Could be subversion going the other way.
Right.
It could be that this hits the YouTube algorithm because they want us to be against beautiful utopian communism.
Possibly.
Yeah, I don't remember. It made sense in my head, but then I was trying to conform it and like
Russia's just trying to unplug us from the Matrix, man.
I don't know, but
trying to save us.
It's interesting that you just can't you just don't know what to do anymore, or trust and stuff because that was I guess my point is like I'm not really like you said. I want to criticize America, right? I want to be able to look at America and say that's not such a good thing, but that could also be the subversion at work, because as you start to question that, then you might to start to think, whoa, the system isn't as awesome as I thought it might be. What other systems are out there? Oh, maybe that system is better. You know, like it feels healthy to look at the wrong and the negatives or the pitfalls of your society, but at the same time that tends to skew your proposition of it, right? So if America's good and just America's good, then there is no room for negotiation. Like, why would I want another system if America's good? But as I start to criticize and I start to undo that leaves room for that susceptibility. So it's like almost like I almost feel like I'm damned if I do and damned if I don't. And really not. Really, the solution is critical thinking, right? To be able to, like you said, take everything on a case-by-case basis, because America isn't all bad and it's not all good. And it's okay to see those both. But we're kind of get into the society where, like, we talk about this all the time. It is in the zeitgeist where people think that America is just a piece of shit. Like, we're just a piece of shit country that fucking bullies everybody and shits on everybody. And we forget all the freedoms and all the amazing things that happen. And, you know, like, there was a lot of people out there, like, advocating for the same response that China had to the pandemic. Like, some people were like, yeah, why don't we just make everybody stay inside? Yeah. And it's like, what the fuck are you talking about, my guy? Like, you know, that's crazy.
Well, this speaks to absolutes too, because it's like, how many times have you seen it culturally appropriate to be like, fuck white people?
Right.
White people are the source of all this bad stuff.
Exactly.
I mean, you can point and say that, like, yeah, white people have been in power and some bad fuck shit has happened. Does that mean I'm bad? Does that mean my grandkids are going to be bad? Look at critical race theory. Does that mean that I owe the two of you something for what my ancestors did and what got us here today? I've never personally done anything to either one of you.
Well, you only owe us half.
Yeah. 20 acres and we'll call it a capybara. No, you're not getting a mule from me.
For me, I think that, and this is why when we started this section of the podcast, I kind of wanted to give the caveat of how, like, I'm not anti-communism on its face, you know? And I think that to kind of get to what you were talking about a second ago, Rod, like, I think that subversion isn't necessarily a negative thing, because I'm always outcome based. Like, I look at things based on the outcome, not on how you wanted it to go. So, like, if they subvert us with Soviet propaganda that ends up leading us to opening more avenues for Black people and homosexuals and all the different minorities, and, like, it improves our society and makes us more open and accepting of other people, then I wouldn't necessarily say that that's a bad thing. Even if the Soviet Union was trying to do, you know, to cause us to fall, like, obviously I'm not going to be buddy with them, but, you know, no harm, no foul type of situation. But I think that this is why I'm so much for combining these things and pulling what's useful out of them and adding it to some sort of like a Frankenstein system where you cherry pick the good parts and you get rid of the bad parts.
It damn sure worked for China.
Yeah, well, yes, in some ways, yes. But again, any way that you do it's going to work for certain people of the society, and other people are not going to benefit from that way of doing it, which is why I'm also about doing that on small scales and, like, having smaller government entities where you're not making rules for such large quantities of people, since the variability between that group could be very drastic. And so I don't necessarily, like, I think that if you had to ask me if, like, the Soviet Union was subverting us or if Russia is continuing to subvert us, I would say yes. And I'd say that, just like with anything, if we can look at it consciously, then we can take things that we think will benefit us from their culture and their economic systems, and we can implement them here without falling into the trap that they're trying to set for us.
Unfortunately, a majority of people are unconscious, though. So it's
and that's why I think that a lot of the root causes of a lot of these political problems that we have are actually housed within individuals and needing to become more active in their own lives, so that way they have a better understanding of how certain things that the government does will really affect them. Because if you're propagandized to the point, like he said, where you can't make sense of anything, you give up the idea of, like, critical thinking and looking at things without accepting the face value of them, then that just, because I'm not anti-communist, I'm anti-tyranny. And you can have tyranny in a democracy, you can have tyranny in communism, you can have tyranny in any governmental system. So that's what I want to avoid. But the problem is that the way that it's looking is that people are losing that ability to look at things critically. And they are just accepting things at face value due to tribal attachments, like you talked about, John. So the more we go down that road, the more I see opportunities for tyrannical oppression on all kinds of different societies.
Yeah, the normalization hit me. When he was talking about the normalization, I thought to myself, you know, if on January 7th, they really had overturned the election the day prior and Trump had become, president again, or had not given up power, or, you know, they had tried some people for treason, or if some shit like that had gone down, instead of them just kind of walking around in there and
stealing paintings
and then getting pushed out by the cops.
Like if it was like an actual insurgency.
Yeah, like if it had fully bloomed, because it felt like it didn't fully bloom. It felt like a flower that was going to open up its petals and then it kind of stopped.
Yeah.
But if it had fully bloomed into a real insurrection and the next day it was normal and it became normalized, you're telling me that couldn't happen?
Yeah.
That was real fucking close to happening.
Isn't it really interesting that we use that term in our society now? Like normalize XYZ, like normalize XYZ this and that. Like that's fascinating.
Yeah, normalize asking people for the pronouns instead of just looking at them and trying to determine them yourself.
Yeah, okay. We want to normalize all these things.
And that's why
it's like you said, like normalize insurrection. Is this how it should be? Like our democracy's fucked. Like, you know, we should be able to like.
Yeah, and that's what he was talking about. He's like, that's why he said that it was an ironic term. He's like, it's an ironic phrase because, you know, when the leader of the when they invaded Czechoslovakia with fucking tanks to squash the rebellion that was happening there, they were like, the situation is now normalized, meaning we are in control once again. That's the normal, and that's the problem, is that like somebody's normal is somebody else's abnormal. So like, your normal is regular 2010s American political system, and all of a sudden you have a coup d'etat break off and Joe Biden gets axed. Now, like, that's normal to some people. They're like, yes, that's good. That's what we were looking for. We wanted to kill this motherfucker and put our own guy in there. So it's like, you got to be careful about how you define the thing. Like, what exactly means normal to you?
It's funny because, before Breonna Taylor in that specific case, if I had seen a giant police SWAT tank roll up to my apartment complex and pour out 35 stormtroopers, I wouldn't really have thought there's a chance I'm going to get killed. But after Breonna Taylor, I was kind of aware to the danger. It was like, those are guns, those are bullets. My walls are made of plaster. If they shred my neighbor when he pulls out that fucking gun, are they going to shred me too? Like, that was now normal. And if you go back to the 1960s, Waco was about the wildest shit you could. Now it was looking like Waco on fucking Sonata Apartments.
Yeah, just right there down the street.
It's just like they had a tank. If I
come in there and fucking shoot your dog.
Yeah, flamethrowers. Like, who knows, bro? This motherfucker had grenade launchers. So I
flashbang your whole floor.
I look at that normalization of the militarization of the police and how they deal with, low level offenders now, and it's only getting worse. They're not going to give up. We gave them tanks. They're not going to give them up. No
public tanks.
Sketchy, dude.
Yep.
Well, that's
be aware of the subversion out there, peeps.
Yeah, I don't even know what advice to give to people because, like I said, it's hard for me to.
Yeah,
trust
shit's
anything,
subliminal. It's cultural. You can't really control it.
I guess that's why I've taken a stance in all of these situations, which is probably not the best stance, but an individual one. Like I just don't tie myself to all of this ruckus and stuff. I'm doing my own thing. I'm helping the people I help. I may be hurting the people I'm hurting. I don't know, but I'm just doing my own thing, man. And like, I just can't be involved with all of that shit.
We're also doing it to each other is a great point that he made. It's not like Billie Eilish is not a Russian agent who's trying to get God out of America's youth by singing songs about Lucifer. No. She's just Billie Eilish
just doing
singing songs about Lucifer. It's fine. She could do that. She's allowed to. But if you want to look at that as a form of subversion, Russia's not paying her to do that. She's doing it willingly, and people are buying it up.
It's a continuation. So like somewhere down the line, someone she had contact with was subverted in the past, and they subverted her, and she's subverting more.
That's what I said. It's a really
and they'll
sketchy
subvert
topic,
other people
because it makes you question.
Multi-level marketing.
You become an unwittingly, what's the word I'm looking for? You become an unwitting
pawn, lackey.
Yeah, exactly. Like you end up falling into the agenda of someone else under the guy. It's like Inception. They've like incepted so many people. They're like, they plant the idea that they want you to have in your head in a way that makes you think it's your idea, so that you're more at the ready to defend it.
Great point.
But that's what I said sucks, because even this conversation is like a pushing of that now, because now that as the viewers, I've introduced them to the idea of subversion. Now they're on guard for subversion, which is like almost like
scary.
Yeah, it's like almost like I said, it makes you feel like, who do I trust?
The subvertinators out
are
to
these
get you.
ideas my ideas, or have I been subverted? It's a really tricky situation,
and
to
it's
think
everywhere.
About. What
Every
I mean?
commercial on your television that's telling you, like, are you a woman experiencing menopause, but you're not sexually aroused? Take this pill to get your pussy wet.
Yeah,
and it's like they're literally subvert. Like, this is just subversion. It's all subversion.
Yeah, like all of it is in some way to try and coerce your thinking, and that's definitely what society is about, right? It's always about trying to encourage you to think in a way that somebody else wants you to think. And like I said, maybe that's the only solution, is just come up with your own fucking ideas and then rock with them.
Turn to monkey.
Or therefore be open to all different types of, data. Because like I said, I don't know. Because I was like, be open to all types of facts, but you're not going to do that. You know what I mean? Like, what are you're
going to have confirmation bias.
And this is why anytime I approach a political conversation or a socioeconomic conversation, I always try to make the point that, like, look, I'm not, whatever you think is happening in this conversation or this discussion, I'm not trying to prove that my way is correct or better than yours or in any way more valuable than your opinions. All I'm doing is saying that I prefer it this way compared to yours. And so because everybody's situations are different, their preferences are going to fall in different places. And so I'm like, look, we're not having a political discussion about whether or not a socialist economy is better or a capitalist economy is better. We're talking about which one we would prefer to live in. That's really what it's getting down to.
Oh, I guess your dog's on the road. All right, that's today's podcast. Appreciate you guys.
We had a puppy emergency. We'll catch you on the next one. Peace.
Just when I think you couldn't possibly be any dumber, you go and do something like this.